there is there's a mechanism to deal with this under international law. Obviously, it's a joke, like international law is a joke and nobody gives a shit. But my goal is not to justify violence. My goal is to end violence. That's the major difference here. Yeah, decolonizepalestine.com is maintained by Palestinians in the West Bank and is very easily digestible. This is a good one too. There's the myths database. We can go through this as well. Before that, though, I do want to do something different. I got permission from LonerBox to watch his 100 Years of Gaza on the broadcast, and I think that that'll be pretty informative. I know that a lot of people don't, a lot of people have probably seen like his debates or some shit. I don't know anything about him personally, but as far as I understand, I've only seen one video of his. Here you go. Netanyahu's insanely dishonest interview with Lex Fridman. That video was very good. In that video, he also promotes another channel called Beast Process, okay? That channel is also very good and very informative, which is precisely the reason why I did not even think for even a brief moment that he was like in any way, shape, or form a Zionist. Now, there might be some criticisms of this video, which I'll admit. I don't know if is he against the ceasefire? Like these are everything I've heard about LonerBox is always from people in the chat. I've never seen something from him that makes me think that he's wrong on the history. I don't know if he's like super pro-Israel or not, but ultimately what I do know is, historically speaking, his videos have been decent on this matter, or at least the one video that I watched. You can't arrive at that conclusion. You cannot arrive at the conclusion that he's doing Zionist propaganda if you look at the actual history openly. All right.
This is a Palestinian man playing his homemade flute to an audience of British soldiers in 1941. It's one of only a few pictures you can find on Google of the old village of Dimra, a small farming community of just over 500 people, 1 kilometer north of the Gaza Strip. In October 1948, 5 months into the Israeli-Arab War, the women and children of Dimra were evacuated as the IDF made their advance into the south. The village was straight in the firing line of Operation Yoav, which began with aerial bombing and strafing attacks, something this community, like most others, had no preparation for. As the IDF was breaking through the Egyptian military lines, the evacuees were pushed into the enclave of Gaza, where they were joined by thousands of other villagers whose homes had suffered a similar fate. Shortly after the war, an American observer described their conditions. Gaza is an unattractive little Arab town with an original population of about 25,000. It now has, in addition, about 60,000 refugees.
So, first of all, did he say, well, one, he's using Benny Morris, so that's interesting. Secondly, I mean, but it's fine. It's fine. It entirely dependent on like what you use with that, what you do with that information. I think he also mentioned the IDF, but that's not. At this point, it's the IDF of October, November 1948 was radically different. It's not the IDF at this point. So, at this point, it is. These are Zionist brigades. They do resemble a standing military. The difference is that I guess there's varying degrees of brutality that they engaged in. Lehi being the absolute worst of the worst, also known as pejoratively known as the Stern Gang, self-described terrorists, those who even tried to cut a deal with Nazi Germany. Not that it like reflects anything on the broader movement, but just important to mention here. There's a lot of ethnic cleansing that occurred here. I think he's correct. I don't think he said anything wrong. I'm just saying that I wouldn't consider it to be the IDF, but instead at this point it's Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi are the three most prominent brigades. Haganah being
as the IDF was breaking.
It's a collection of those different brigades.
Through the Egyptian military lines, the evacuees were pushed into the enclave of Gaza, where they were joined by thousands of other villagers whose homes had suffered a similar fate. Shortly after the war, an American observer described their conditions. Gaza is an unattractive little Arab town with an original population of about 25,000. It now has, in addition, about 60,000 refugees. They pack the sidewalks, take up the vacant lots in the public market, occupy barnyards, and generally seem to fill in every empty space which the town might have had. They live in churches, mosques, schools, and public buildings. These people receive no relief ration as they are recently arrived. As they would soon learn, the refugees of Dimra were never allowed to return home. In 1949, in the newly born state of Israel, a small kibbutz was built over the old village and named Erez. Decades after the war, the remains of Dimra were described as such. Most of the village is fenced in.
For those of you who want to know, Benny Morris is an important Israeli historian that uncovered a lot of this stuff early on, that then changed his opinion, even using the term ethnic cleansing, that then went back on his work and said that ethnic cleansing is actually not appropriate to use, maybe under certain distinctions. He is the academics, the Israeli historians that I rely on are a part of the new historians that were formed after more and more information was uncovered about the actions during the Nakba. Many of this is still classified, unfortunately, even though there's, I believe, a declassification process in Israel where once a 50-year timeline has passed, you're supposed to declassify certain classified documents, even though there are certainly classified documents that never have been officially declassified. I thought it was 50. It could be 30 years. But a lot of this information came out, and the new historian wave occurred. Like Avi Shlaim is one of them. Ilan Pape is another, and Benny Morris is one that I think had different perspectives on at least like calling it ethnic cleansing that changed over the course of his career.
And used as pasture. A crumbling stonewater basin, concrete rubble from houses, and a destroyed well are nearly all that remain. A watering trough for cows has been placed on what appears to be a concrete fragment from a former house. The well is topped with an old, non-operating water pump. More debris lies in a wooden portion of the site near a Jewish cemetery. Some cactuses that formerly served as a fence, as well as shrubs and thorny plants, grow on adjacent lands. This would be the fate of several other villages around the Gaza Strip. A few, like Dimra, were built over. The others were destroyed or abandoned. As their populations struggled to make a new life for themselves in Gaza, the land surrounding their old villages would become home to a new Israeli population as several communities were founded in the area.
I mean, this is not wrong. I don't know why you guys are mad at his coverage of this. This is completely, so far, all of this, as long as it doesn't say it was totally valid and totally justifiable because Jews were under attack everywhere, is completely correct. I don't know why
like the town of Sderot would become predominantly inhabited by Mizrahi and North African Jewish refugees who were seeking to escape persecution from their home countries. After the war, Kibbutz Erez became the place of refuge for Yacob Naim, a Holocaust survivor who had been forced into a labor camp in Libya at the age of 6. 3 weeks ago, Naim's 27-year-old grandson was killed defending his home against Hamas. So, how did we get here? On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched a coordinated surprise attack on Israel codenamed Al-Aqsa Flood. They began with a barrage of thousands of rockets as their militants broke through the Gaza border, attacking IDF bases and civilian communities. Even by their own video uploads, it's clear that Hamas made no distinction between civilian and military targets, or even between adults and children. Over 1,400 Israelis were killed and at least 200 taken hostage. Israel declared a state of war the same day, and as they fought to secure the border, they began what would be the most intense airstrike campaign.
Oh, it started on October 7th? No, dude, come on. This is literally Gaza the last 100 years. It's you're ridiculous if you think that he's just going to sit there and only talk about October 7th when the entire video is about what predates October 7th. Everybody calm down, okay?
In Gaza's history. At the time of recording, up to 6,000 Palestinians have died and 1.4 million have been displaced. This attack from Hamas was completely unprecedented. As in, this might be the first time a Palestinian militant group has ever been able to capture and hold on to Israeli territory.
I mean, this is 100% correct.
The IDF were caught completely off guard. And now we are barely 3 weeks into a war that has already claimed more Israeli and Palestinian lives than every other Gaza war of this century combined. How did this happen? I'm sure by now you've heard at least a few people's opinions on the matter. Many opinions. We've seen a lot of pro-Israel people turn into Howard Stern after 9/11. A lot of pro-Palestinian people turn into, I don't know, Bin Laden after 9/11. And I've had my own opinions. Many opinions. You can have a look through my live channel if you want all the opinions. But for this one, I want to take a step back and hopefully just leave you with a better understanding of what exactly led us up to here.
While I disagree and statements of second thought on that particular matter, I would not compare his words to Bin Laden, especially because I hope this video will show that there is a reason as to why, one, Hamas came to power, and two, there is a reason as to how this violence materialized.
The recent events in Israel and Palestine have been
What did Second Thought say? He talked about how these are settlers and are illegally occupying the space that they're in, and therefore are valid targets. Something along those lines. I don't even fully know what he fucking said. What did he say? This is what a liberation struggle looks like. Solidarity and victory to the Palestinian people. The attacks on Israeli civilians are awful, but attacks on Palestinian civilians have been continuing for years with little comment in the West and will continue until there's a proper solution, not a militarized apartheid Zionist state in power. Imagine someone comes to your town, murders your neighbors, kicks you out of your home and your family has lived for generations, and relocates you to an open-air prison. Are those occupiers civilians? No, they're criminals and accomplices in genocide. Yeah. He basically said what you said, except he didn't wait 17 years. No. What I said in the aftermath of October 7 was that this is, of course, going to be an expression, a violent retaliation to a brutal apartheid. I do not consider the fucking Israeli kibbutzim, like people living in the fucking kibbutzes and their children, to be valid military targets. I don't. I don't even consider the fucking settler terrorists and their children in the West Bank to be valid military targets. There is there's a mechanism to deal with this under international law. Obviously, it's a joke. Like, international law is a fucking joke and nobody gives a shit. But my goal is not to justify violence. My goal is to end violence. That's the major difference here between myself and Second Thought. Kibbutznikim, people who live in the kibbutzim. Sorry, I used the wrong term. Anyway, let's continue.
The recent events in Israel and Palestine have been incredibly polarizing. People are anxiously watching towards Lebanon, where Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging fire for weeks, and the Israeli ground invasion of Gaza has begun. The situation is unprecedented, and especially through the fog of war, it's hard to know exactly what information is reliable. Using ground news, I can see that the ground operation is being covered by 165 sources. I can see that the majority of the coverage is coming from the political center as well as the left, although only 17% from the right. This suggests that the operation might be a blind spot for right-wing readers. I can also see that the center and left-wing sources covering this seem to be the most factually reliable, whilst many of the right-wing sources have mixed factuality. This means that they don't always use proper sourcing, or that they might fail to correct false or misleading information.
This is an ad read, isn't it?
And crucially, ground news also allows me to see who exactly is funding each source. The ground
motherfucker's doing an ad read at the top of the hour, nonetheless. When I have my own my own personal ad read coming, fucked up. That was a really good segue, straight up. Here, I'm running my ad as well.
A news website and app works by aggregating news articles from thousands of sources, giving you access to a range of different perspectives, allowing you to challenge your own biases. Something which I think is crucial if you want to avoid misleading headlines.
And your arguments there are literally correct and in line with international humanitarian law. Despite how morally reprehensible settler actions are in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, they are never considered anything other than civilians under international human IHL, citizens within the official boundaries of the State of Israel are, of course, civilian. Yes. Citizens within the official boundaries of the State of Israel are, of course, civilian. Settlers, on the other hand, especially those who are armed, especially those who are engaging in pogroms and acts of violence, are technically legally considered enemy combatants and engaging in an act of terror, and therefore, especially against the IDF, the Israeli occupying force in the West Bank, or against settlers in general in the West Bank, many of which have engaged in, not many, but like a lot of which have engaged in paramilitary action against Palestinians living on their own turf, are legally and morally allowed to fight back violently. Now, the difference is there is no matter of international law that allows you to kill children. It's just like, it doesn't, I think it's morally repugnant. That's why I criticize Israel all the fucking time, because they are literally the #1 baby killers, okay? Straight up, objectively, they are the #1 baby killers. Completely unacceptable. And I would say the exact same thing to little babies in the West Bank too. Like, if people went around slaughtering little babies in the fucking West Bank, settler babies, that would be unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. That's not how this works. This is also part of the reason why I personally believe in a one-state solution. That one state, Ohio, exactly.
And disinformation. And if you go to ground.news/LonerBox, you can get 30% off from your unlimited access plan. All you need to do is use the link in the description. So, Gaza's history is ancient. Its recorded history goes back about 4,000 years, and it has switched hands quite a few times. It was once a Canaanite settlement before it came under the control of ancient Egypt. In around 1200 BC, it was taken over by the Philistines. That word, Philistine, would become the etymological origin of the term Palestine, or in Arabic, Philistine. It was conquered by King David and for some time became part of the Kingdom of Israel. In 332 BC, it was captured by Alexander the Great, and most of the people living there were killed. It would later come under the Romans, who at some point renamed Gaza, as well as the rest of the region, from Judea to Palestina. Some scholars have suggested that this was done as a way to wipe out Jewish memory from the region after the Bar Kokhba revolt.
No.
Maybe that's true. I've read other people say that it was being called that before the revolt for more benign reasons.
It was.
I guess those aren't mutually exclusive though, but you can fight amongst yourselves on that one. What else? It was taken over during the Muslim conquest of the 7th century, the Crusaders in the 12th century. In 1516, it came under the Ottoman Empire and remained so all the way up until 1917 when it was captured by the British. And by this point, the majority of Gazans were Muslim, but throughout this whole history, there was always a persistent Jewish presence in the area. This, for example, is a mosaic from a synagogue that was built in Gaza City around the 6th century. Isn't that crazy? But under British rule, this historic Jewish presence in the enclave was temporarily ended. 1917 was also the year of the Balfour Declaration, the precursor for what would eventually be the forming of a Jewish state in historic Palestine. When this declaration was made, Jews made up around 8% of the region's population. By the late 20s, that number was up to 15%. At this point, the Palestinians had hoped to come out of the British Empire with a system of majority rule over the whole region, but...
Like, the aspects of this that are missing, I guess, because this is a 34-minute video, I would personally say that's why I'm reacting to it, to add more information that he couldn't get to, is, well, that one, obviously Balfour is an anti-Semite, and one of the major reasons as to why this was pushed originally is to get Jewish people out of Europe. 2, he mentioned in 1918 there's a 6% population. Historically, in historic Palestine, the number was 3%. But there was a steady flow of immigration that has started by that point, and by 1918 it reached up to 6%. This is all, in my opinion, important to recognize specifically because, did he say 6% or 8%? Well, it doesn't matter. It was less than 10%. What matters is that the British also gave assurances to, just like the French did, the Arab populations living under the Ottoman Empire, that if they aligned with the British, during World War I that they would be able to engage in building their own nation states. So similar promises were made to the Palestinian population as were to, as to those living in Lebanon and everywhere else. Now, of course, British people had a very different opinion. They wanted to, one, get Jews out of Europe in general because they were also anti-Semitic, and two, thought that they could use the Jewish population against the native Arab population, that they could very easily just manipulate both of these groups, obviously still heavily favoring the Jewish population as it was at that moment, in that time frame, an act of ethnic displacement. Resettlements occur all the time. Resettlements have occurred all the time throughout history. One of the examples that I've talked about before is Crimea. There was ethnic displacement of the Crimean Tatars from the area, and there was a Russification both in Crimea and a lot of territories in even eastern Ukraine. This is a consistent principle of a dominating power that ends up changing the demography of the region, oftentimes through violence, through violent means. You cannot compare that to the population transfer between Greece and Turkey, in my opinion, because while that was also done through very violent means, I would say, it was still different than a colonial power coming in and ruthlessly displacing the native population, uprooting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people from the homelands that they lived in and telling them to go somewhere else is always going to be a brutal process. I know this from my literal grandparents. Like, they are, my grandmother and my grandfather on my father's side come from Crete and Salonik, both mainland and also island, Greek islands. They literally experienced this population swap that occurred, the border swap that occurred. They were there. So I know Greeky's been lying this whole time. Yeah.
By the late 20s, it became very clear that this was not going to happen. So in this period, there was a lot of conflict between Arabs and Jews, and in 1929, there were riots in several major cities.
True.
The most famous of these was the Hebron massacre, where over 60 Jews were brutally murdered, many of them women and children. And it was following these riots where several Jewish communities in the region, including Gaza, were forcibly evacuated by the British. So by 1948, the population of the Gaza Strip is somewhere between 60 and 80,000. Now, there's obviously a lot to say about this period, but for the purpose of this video, we'll keep it short. Basically, the UN tries to partition the region, turning one part into a Jewish state and the other into an Arab state, with Jerusalem as an international zone. The Palestinians, who made up around 2/3 of the total population of the region, reject this offer, and when the British mandate ends...
Yeah, well, they reject it because, one, they're like, what the fuck? This is our home. We were supposed to have a nation state. Like, why the fuck would we ever listen to the international community or a colonial power, in their opinion at the time, forcibly changing the demographics? And on top of that, literally creating an Arab state that has 43% of the land and a Jewish state that has 56% of the land, despite the fact that Jewish people made up a much smaller percentage of the population at this point. Yeah, of course you're going to say, what the fuck? No, that is terrible. Especially when, according to Ilan Pape and others, and Zach Foster, who I talked to about this as well on the broadcast, the lands that early Zionist settlers wanted to or were able to purchase was very limited, and it was not arable. It was not good land, not good for agricultural development. So now they have significantly better land. It's like, well, what the fuck? Anyway, let's
The
continue.
neighboring Arab countries declare war on the new state of Israel. And they lose. The result of this war is that Israel consolidated even more territory than what they were offered by the UN, turning Gaza into a disconnected enclave, and on top of this, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes in what is now the Land of Israel. We know today that the majority of these people fled because they were either...
Okay, on that, I mean, I don't agree with that. I think that's definitely, yeah, I mean, I think that not even me that would disagree with that. I think plenty of Israeli Jewish historians would disagree with that. Even on his own admission, like the scholar that he used, Benny Morris, and I think like his earlier work would also disagree with that as well. I think like, yeah, even Benny Morris has acknowledged that the Nakba happened. I don't know. I feel like it's I mean, this
directly forced out by the IDF, or because they had heard about war crimes and massacres being committed by Israeli soldiers in other villages. Many of these people were forced into Gaza, where the population almost tripled to around 200,000. So,
I mean, that part is true. It's not wrong. That is how the Nakba happened. Obviously, they didn't just hear about the gross war crimes. They also committed gross war crimes. Deir Yassin and Tantura are two that have that you know, firsthand, those who were firsthand involved have uncovered details of. I think that 700,000 people being ethnically displaced with a standing army, committing acts of insane terror, like shit that they say Hamas did, some of which Hamas may have even done, in comparison to like back then, shit that they certainly did, like 100% verifiably did. The one about Deir Yassin is the one that stays with me, especially because the intelligence person that, because there are Jewish villages at this point, and then there are Arab villages, okay? Some Arab villages at least have like some semblance of a standing militia, but they're obviously not as powerful, nor do they have the same level of, nor do they have the same level of firepower that the British trained Israeli forces have. I think that that power imbalance should be talked about. Ultimately, what ends up happening is 6,000 deaths on the Israeli side. I get the Jewish side, the Zionist side, whatever you want to call it at that point, with 15,000 Palestinians dying. So the disproportionate nature of casualties began in the inception of the Israeli state. So yes, Zionists also had illegal arms that they were able to bring in through illicit means. They had arms they had gotten. They had training from the British militias. They had training from the British police force at this point. Some of them were literally World War II veterans. I feel like talking about it and mentioning the Hebron, the massacre of 60 Jewish people, while glancing over the 700,000 Palestinians that fled their homes specifically because of the atrocities, the documented atrocities that were committed in an organized attempt, by the way. There was this was a well-oiled machine at this point, and it was perfectly organized. It was a standing military going into fucking towns and just ruthlessly slaughtering populations, and then allowing the fear of that to continue on to other Palestinian populations, so that whenever they went to other Palestinian towns, Palestinian cities, then these people, knowing full well about what happened in Tantura, Deir Yassin, would run away, and of course still killing people in those towns as well. Some of the psyops that they engaged in, for example, were they had armored personnel carriers. They had loudspeakers. I don't get, how did he ignore it? Loner knows about the plans. Irgun, Nakba, Deir Yassin, he says, and we'll say what you're saying. Well, I mean, he moved on. He went from it, he called the Nakba period the Israeli-Arab War, which I feel like is already, like, I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a little bit of energy in the other direction there, as far as like both the asymmetry of violence and also who the victims were ultimately
So
of said
if
violence.
you've ever heard people talk about how densely populated this area is, you're maybe starting to see why. After the 48 War, Gaza came under the military occupation of Egypt. By this point, the majority of Gazans were refugees, and that would remain the case up until this day. The Strip suffered from poverty, poor living conditions, high unemployment, and with no statehood, most of them didn't really have anywhere else to go. They weren't even allowed to enter Egypt until 1954. For many of them, the bitterness of living as refugees, knowing full well that the ruins of their old homes were just a short walk away in what was now a flourishing new state, was a bit too much to live with.
Don't you think he also makes it seem like the Arabs were the aggressors by omitting all the ethnic displacements that was previously committed by the British? It does feel like that a little bit. Maybe I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm being very charitable to his coverage, but it does feel like he's, it does redeploy the same narrative that I've heard time and time again, that like the Arabs are the aggressors in this circumstance, without really covering what their perspective on the matter would be. He covers it in the aftermath and why it's like, you know, this ethnic displacement was obviously going to be scarring, but there's definitely a buildup to that moment that their fears were realized, yes, but also they had valid reason to fear. Not because they were like scared of Jewish people or whatever due to anti-Semitism, especially considering that Jewish people at the time, especially in Palestine, is not like a subgroup that is being pogromed at all, especially under the Ottoman Empire, where there was significantly less brutality towards Jewish people than their European counterparts. But also, he is, I mean, I think he's very, very well read on this matter, so I do feel a little surprised in the way that he brought it. A little surprised in the way that he brought it up. Because, like I said, I think that the ones who were wronged in this circumstance were absolutely the Arabs. And one, they were right to feel threatened, because this wasn't like Jewish people immigrating into this area peacefully and you know, this was like a collaborative effort or whatever. Although there were certainly Jewish people that were immigrating peacefully and were interested in integration, interested in like collaboration. For the broader Arab population there, the broader Palestinian population there, some of which were Jewish, it seemed as though this was a colonial power, a new master, if you will, that was engaging in displacement by changing the demographics of the population on the ground. A coordinated Western effort, yes, which is true. I mean, that is what happened. That was exactly what it was. So, you know, their understanding of the situation, especially considering the assurances that they supposedly got from the British, I think it makes it way more reasonable for them to want to defend. They see this as like not necessarily people peacefully moving into this area, but instead as a violent act from a colonial power that rules them, because it was.
A small minority of Gazans resorted to violence and started launching low-level attacks into Israel. These nationalist militants, who often made no distinction between civilian and military targets, would become known as the Fedayeen, or in English, self-sacrificers. The IDF would then respond with raids on Gazan refugee camps, one of which resulted in 50 civilian deaths. In the mid-50s, there was even a plan organized by Egypt and the UN to transfer the refugees from Gaza into the Sinai Desert. The Palestinians, who saw this as a way of killing off their right of return, protested en masse against the plan, resulting in violent clashes with the Egyptian military. The protests were so unmovable that the resettlement scheme was abandoned in 1955. Then, in 1956, during the Suez Canal crisis, the IDF was present in Gaza for around 4 months, with the objective of rooting out Fedayeen fighters. These operations were incredibly rough. It seems to be
You see wait, what the fuck? Oh, I muted it on accident. Do you see a one-to-one comparison here? Time and time again, it's just odd. Time and time again, there's an understandable resistance to a outside nation that, at the very least, like the Egyptians offered them like some level of authority, some level of autonomy, some level of authority to the Palestinians inside of Gaza. But even then, all of these circumstances lead to Palestinian interests never being represented. Their understandable interests never being represented. Their morally righteous interests never being represented. Okay? At this point, they've become permanent refugees. They're still close enough to their ancestral homelands, but they're still permanent refugees nonetheless. And the disposition of any kind of violent retaliation, which was perfectly valid, any kind of violent retaliation that was perfectly valid was always met with a tremendous amount of state violence. State violence both by the IDF and state violence by, for example, the Jordanian Authority.
Scheme was abandoned
and the
in
Egyptian Authority.
Then, in 1956, during the Suez Canal crisis, the IDF was present in Gaza for around 4 months with the objective of rooting out Fedayeen fighters. These operations were incredibly rough. It seems to be the case that dozens of Fedayeen were summarily executed without trial even after the fighting had stopped. In the towns of Rafah and Khan Yunis, the IDF operations devolved into massacres and over 375 people were killed. The details surrounding these events are murky, although a UN report from the time didn't exactly paint the Israeli forces in the best light. For example, the killings in the Rafah refugee camp happened after the IDF had called the men up for a screening procedure. It seemed like the call wasn't clearly delivered across the whole camp, and the men were not given enough time to respond to the call. In the confusion, a large number of them ran toward the screening point for fear of being reprimanded for being late. In response, some Israeli soldiers panicked and opened fire on the crowd, killing 111 people.
Okay. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is a tremendous amount of charitability offered to the IDF every single step of the way. They're not simply, I mean, if you believe that, then yeah, you also believe personally that like Israel's currently wiping out Hamas. Like, it's not ethnic cleansing. They're simply engaging in a military operation in the Gaza Strip, just like they have time and time again. And oopsie, there's no deliberate attempt to mow the lawn. And it's always just simply in a moment of panic, 111 people just like, I hit the genocide button. No, I don't agree with this, because I do ascribe a motivation to all of the actions that IDF and before IDF, like other Zionist brigades have engaged in. And I do think that not mentioning the violence within the Nakba and simply glancing over it is also not correct, because that violence set the tone for the expulsion. Because like if you're talking about in Hebron, 60 Jewish people being slaughtered in a pogrom or something similar to a pogrom, in a riot, many of them women and children, you have to bring up, in my opinion, these incredibly formative events in Deir Yassin, Tantura, and many others that we don't even fucking know about because some of this shit is not declassified, that led to the violent expulsion of 700,000 Palestinians. Like, they didn't just leave. Like, he doesn't do the Ben Shapiro thing. Ben Shapiro personally lies and says there was an Arab war. All the Arabs were like, fuck the Jews. And we wanted to kill all the Jews. And then all of these Palestinians foolishly thought that they would escape and the Arabs would save them, and then they'd be able to come back to their homes. Like, it's ridiculous. The Arabs abandoned their home. You are anti-Semitic to the bones? What? What do you mean? Are you saying I'm anti-Semitic to the bone? Like, down to the very bone? I don't even know what that means. I'm fucking bad to the bone.
Notably, Israeli officials at the time didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing, but they didn't deny it either. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, Israel took control over the Gaza Strip, as well as the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, which had been previously controlled by Jordan, and the Golan Heights, which had previously been part of Syria. So that's a lot, and now Israel had to decide what to do with these territories. Some of them, for example, East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, were annexed, but the future of Gaza was unclear. In the early days after the war, the Israeli cabinet even considered expelling the Palestinians living there, although this was quickly ruled out. That's encouraging. When Israel finally managed to make peace with Egypt over a decade later, they negotiated the transfer back of the Sinai Desert. But the Egyptians had no interest in taking back Gaza, which from here on would remain in limbo. And it was in 1973, under Israeli occupation, when a quadriplegic imam called Sheikh Ahmed Yassin founded a charity in Gaza called Mujama al-Islamiyya, in English, Islamic Center. Born out of the Palestinian branch of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, this charity set up an Islamic university in Gaza, as well as mosques, schools, and a library.
It was recognized as a charity by Israel in 1979 and briefly given financial support. Also true. I mean, he will, I assume, mention that these guys were not exactly power players.
They also played an important role in providing healthcare and social services to Gazans, many of whom were still living in refugee camps. The heads of Islamic Center were rabidly anti-Semitic, but the Israelis were willing to tolerate them and, to a degree, even encouraged them for a very interesting reason. By the mid-70s, the Israeli government had been warned that Yassin was no traditional Muslim cleric. It was unlikely that he even had any formal Islamic training, and he seemed to be a lot more interested in politics than in faith. But for some Israeli officials, the political Islam of Yassin wasn't such a bad thing, because for them, it served as a counterweight to Israel's main enemies, the secular nationalists of the PLO. As a way of attempting to divide their Palestinian opponents, Israel officially recognized the Islamic Center as a legitimate charity, and
everything he said so far is completely correct here in this point. And I would even go so far as say, I mean, I guess he didn't mention that like Hamas in and of itself was like entirely like they were nothing. And in 1988 as well, when they became more like when they developed more political power by that point, they were still completely a marginal, completely powerless movement.
Even for a period, provided them with financial support. And without the benefit of hindsight, it isn't hard to see why they did this. At the time, it was the PLO who were carrying.
Without the benefit of hindsight, I mean, yeah, this is a story as old as time itself. It quite literally has identical parallels to the Mujahideen. Yeah, it has identical parallels of the Mujahideen, which were funded and radicalized by the United States of America, even before like Ronald Reagan, under Carter, because they thought that this would present a perfect opportunity against the communist Afghan government, which was also pretty ruthless in and of itself. So there was already plenty of interest on the ground to rise up against, from Islamists to rise up against the Afghan communist government, which then ended up turning into the Afghan civil war, Soviet invasion, yada, yada, yada. But also, the reason why I mentioned that, and the reason why, this is important to understand is because Western powers have been doing this for a very long time. Now, of course, modern Hamas, and I will admit this readily, easily, except Hamas is nowhere as fundamental as Al-Qaeda, both of whom are offshoots of their respective organizations. You are absolutely correct. Not only that, but also, Hamas has a much greater interest in civil governance, whether by survival or genuine interest, I don't know. But Hamas has a much larger interest in civil governance than other significantly more radical Islamist factions in comparison to what Hamas is in modern day. Okay? Hamas's tactics are ruthless. They are brutal. This much is true. The brutality, however, has been adjusted due to the brutality of the occupation over the course of many, many years. Anyway, I feel like there's this part is going to be really interesting to see what he says, but I am a firm believer that there would never, ever be a real, robust, viable Hamas or Islamic Jihad if it was not for the Israeli government. Not because they funded it or whatever, I'm not even saying that, but specifically because Israel showed the Palestinian people time and time again that if you collaborate with us, we'll fuck you over. You won't get anything. We will keep dangling the two-state solution in your fucking face as an effort to neuter all of your popular movements. We will neuter your popular movements. We will never give you anything. We will continue building settlements in the West Bank, and there's not really anything you can do about it. And then we'll take your secular parties that were once popular, once they've become significantly unpopular, we will take them under our security apparatus and use them as oppressive forces against the Palestinian population, as is what the Palestinian Authority does on this very day. They did this with the earlier versions of this were absolutely happening with the PLO as well. There was always violence that the Israeli government absolutely egged on, sectarian violence that is the Israeli government absolutely egged on between Islamist factions like Hamas versus the PLO and other secular formations. Not only that, but I will take it one step further. The irony now is that as awful as Hamas is, or as ruthless and as brutal as Hamas is, which I will always recognize is a byproduct of the brutality of this occupation, the irony of the matter is that Fatah at a certain point literally arrested under the Israeli Authority, under the recommendation of Israel, the leader of the PLFP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Marxist-Leninist formation. They arrested him. The people that pushed for his release were Hamas. So even the modern day Hamas does not resemble the same Islamists, even though their leaders are, certainly, even though their leaders are, and there's a lot of internal rift within Hamas as well, that the modern day Hamas being compared to ISIS is completely ridiculous, absolutely unacceptable. I do not agree with that. That is factually incorrect. This does not mean that they're good, mind you, but it certainly gets lost in the sauce, and I think it's like a mechanism to propagandize. It's like looking at that and making that comparison is like looking at Israel and saying they're Nazi Germany. The violence that Israel subjects Palestinians to is certainly nowhere near the same level of violence that Nazis subjected Jewish people to. There are comparisons you can make, but you can't say that it's a one-to-one comparison in the same way that Hamas and ISIS are not only diametrically opposite to one another, especially because while they are both coming from other larger Islamist fundamentalist groups, Hamas being Muslim Brotherhood, their allegiances with global partners have been with literal Shias, with Iran. Hezbollah is Shia, Iran is Shia. Their current regional ally that is rising to the occasion is the Shia Houthi government that is sending missiles, which I did not even know, from fucking space, which is crazy to think about, especially when you remember the fact that they were under blockade not that long ago. That's right. Yemen and the missiles that they're sending to Israel literally go all the way up to fucking space. It's crazy. Anyway, why did I bring all this up? Because Al-Qaeda and even the Taliban, as a matter of fact, which also has a responsibility of civil governance in comparison to the contemporaries that the Taliban is compared to, is still significantly more Islamist, like way more interested in a Sharia regime, if you want to call it that, or an Islamist regime in its civil governance in comparison to Hamas. That's why when you go to Gaza, for example, there's plenty of women that don't have any fucking headscarves. There's literally fucking Christian Palestinians that are able to pray in their own Christian churches and shit. If there was a comparison that you could make between the motivations of Hamas being like an Islamist fundamentalist one, especially one that like is similar to ISIS or Al-Qaeda, then they wouldn't be killing ISIS and Al-Qaeda operatives that have tried to garner influence. Now, it could be from the reason why they've killed ISIS and Al-Qaeda militia inside of Gaza could be potentially because they want to be the only game in town. Certainly, it could be out of again, self-preservation. But ultimately, the way that they've continued on their civil governance side has, at least leads me to believe that while they are understandably declared a terror cell because they are targeting civilians as well, sometimes due to the fact that they do not have enough, they do not have guided munitions. They are not in any way, shape, or form comparable to ISIS, who had very different motivations. This is a very important fact, though. Why? Why is this a very important fact to understand? Because when you understand this fact, you also have to come to the conclusion that the greatest way to destroy Hamas does not come from violence. Violence only makes super Hamas. Violence only makes Hamas more violent. The greatest way to end the influence of Hamas upon the Palestinian population is by going to a time when they didn't have any fucking Hamas. Hamas had no influence whatsoever, and there was no reason for there to be a violent emancipatory movement because, you know, they were dealing with the Palestinians in a negotiations process, at least at the time people thought earnestly, when it wasn't.
Carrying out attacks against civilians, whilst the Islamic Center was completely peaceful. This would come to an end in 1984 when the Israelis discovered that Yassin and others had been secretly stockpiling weapons in one of their mosques. He was jailed only to be released a year later as part of a prisoner exchange. In 1987, Yassin and 6 other members of Islamic Center founded a small paramilitary party called Hamas. Their formation would take place right in the wake of the First Intifada, which was a 6-year period of intense protest and violence, mostly born out of Palestinian frustration at the lack of progress towards statehood.
That and also the violent subjugation and humiliation that had already started at this point, including the pivotal moment where 4 Palestinians were killed by a trucker that ran them over, and then the subsequent protests against that turned incredibly violent. Once again, Israel ramping up the fucking violence, always and forever. Something to remember, always. This is not happening as a consequence of this is not happening randomly, okay? This is not happening randomly. Sabra and Shatila not even getting a mention. That was a massive spur on many Palestinian events that followed. Also true as well. So gross and so gruesome that punishments were even, light punishments were even doled out internally for the massacre. These are all incredibly violent acts that Palestinians are experiencing. Different country doesn't matter. These are still Palestinians. Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon is still housing Palestinians. You think they don't fucking hear about what's going on? You don't think that they hear that the IDF has allowed psychopathic Christian fascist militias to literally go into a Palestinian refugee camp to kill Hamas members in an identical fashion, where the only thing that they're doing at that point is literally blocking off all the exits, allowing them to slaughter babies and women. Literally, if you've ever heard someone talk about a pregnant woman having their child cut out of their body, okay, while the child is still alive, that's from Sabra and Shatila. That's where that story comes from. That's where that happened. They send in the psycho fucking no, his father is not a phalangist. Shut the fuck up. You're just saying that because he's a Christian Lebanese. I don't think his father is a phalangist. Shut up. Ridiculous. Anyway, if you look at the situation, if you look at all of the events that unfolded and you don't really talk about or focus on in any capacity, phalangists were attached to the IDF by that time. Yes, they also murdered Shia Lebanese there. Yes, also true. Listen, if you don't focus on the atrocities committed by Israel at this point against Palestinians, then yeah, you're probably going to think oh, they just wanted freedom, and it's kind of fucked up that maybe they were getting a little too violent in their interest in gaining emancipation, in their interest in gaining freedom. But I mean, it's far more than just that. Although it is just to engage in an emancipatory act, the violent conditions that Israel subjected Palestinians to, both inside of the areas that they had occupied at this point, but also even outside of the areas that they occupied, or even in countries, neighboring countries, was unimaginably cruel.
Israelis battled with the youth of the Intifada, then PLO dominated. the Islamic movement was being allowed to grow. In the hope of breaking the unity of the Intifada, the Hamas trend was ignored.
By this point, they controlled just under half of all the mosques in Gaza, and they were able to use the charity's institutions as a cover for their operations, a tactic they still employ to this day. Politically, they were rejectionists. They opposed any negotiations or compromises with Israel and instead argued that the Jewish state should be obliterated and replaced with a single Islamic state.
This part is true, but I think it's also important. I hope he will mention that due to their attitude, they were unpopular. This is very important. Due to this attitude, they were one of the few rejectionist parties and therefore completely and utterly removed from any semblance of real power.
State of Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. As for their opinion,
still defending fascists? I hope you're talking about you're not talking about me, I hope. Is the inherently violent view in this case not so different than the people who say some people are bad and do crimes? Jank's view on crime? Yes.
On the Jews, I think their founding charter, along with their recent actions, makes it pretty unambiguous. I don't really know the rules about reading out terrorist manifestos on YouTube, so you can...
The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." Zionism's scheming has no end, and after Palestine, they will covet expansion from the Nile to the Euphrates River when they finish digesting in the area on land which they've laid their hands, yada, yada, yada. So, here's the thing. I need to repeat this again. I don't know about unpopular. Yassin was a key figure / spiritual leader of the first Intifada. Politically, they were nothing. They were nothing. At this point, there were still, especially because there were still people who were interested in violently resisting against Israel. Those intifadas did not happen with like Hamas militants. Those were regular old Palestinian citizens, okay? Those were normal Palestinians that were fucking fighting back against a brutal occupation.
Pause this and read it. Now, Hamas did not win over the Palestinian...
Thank you. There you go. Suck my dick, chatter.
...public right away. In 1989, they were supported by less than 3% of the people living in Gaza, though they would slowly gain...
There you go. In 1989, fewer than 3% of Palestinians in Gaza, where Hamas would prove strongest, supported the organization. In the days before the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993, only 16.6% of Palestinians in Gaza identified with Hamas politically, and only 10% of the West Bank. This figure was much smaller when it came to active supporters. The journalist Zaki Chehab claimed that Hamas' military wing only had 20 machine guns when it began its campaign of terrorism as the Intifada wound down. For much of the 1990s, the military wing never reached 100 total fighters.
In support over the 90s, they were still a long way from taking power. What kept them at bay in this period, more than anything else, was the optimism of the peace process.
Yes. Okay, this is 100% correct. Yes. So here's why that's important to understand. Because, of course, a violent rejectionist movement was not going to be considered serious at all. Understandable, however, that it existed because it's still a fucking occupation. It's still an apartheid. There's still a shit ton of violence that is happening as a consequence of this against Palestinians. That's why Sabra and Shatila is important. That's why understanding how the first Intifada happened is important, right? You can't just like glance over it and be like, oh, they just wanted rights, so they started fucking violently reacting. That's not true, okay? A murder took place. No real legal recourse was occurring for said murder because the victims were Palestinians. Palestinians rose up. There were strikes, mass strikes. There's still freedom of movement leading up to this moment. There's still freedom of movement between Gaza, West Bank, and Israel proper. At this point, Palestinians and Israelis, not just the Palestinian citizens of Israel, but like Palestinians that don't have Israeli citizenship are allowed to go to Israeli schools. Israelis are allowed to go to Palestinian schools. Like, there is significant more collaboration. They're like still second-class citizens now. However, while they're still second-class citizens, their situation is not as dire. So for them, they're of course going to push back and be like, what the fuck are you doing? You're like, you killed our people. Like, that's completely unacceptable. And they fought back. Okay? They fought back, some of which had more violent and also anti-Semitic interests. But to say that that was the case for the broader Palestinian liberation movement throughout any point in history, with the exception of, I guess, like fucking 1948, The boundary shifted. Things changed. Periyodu var. Her yere kanıyor. My dad says she's grown so much. Ben yedim bile. That last chatter literally uses the same name they use for jerk off in what Joe IE in video requests, and all of his preferred models are Jewish. One's name was Squirt Mitzvah, and I had the X out of there. Don't make me read this right now, Lamau. Oh my God. I forgot what JOI is. Is it jerk off instructions? Is that what it is? I just says, tamam. Regardless, love you, Hasanabi. Keep reporting the truth, mate. Yeah, of course.
In 1993, the PLO leader Yasser Arafat and the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed the Oslo.
By the way, you guys understand why I think it's like why I say what I say about Hamas in general now, right? Like, I don't think he's making that argument either, by the way. I think he's like been pretty fair thus far. Damn, Mott's clapped that guy who was saying some anti-Semitic shit in the chat before I could get to him. But like, that's why I think it's like ridiculous. That's why I think it is ridiculous to look at Hamas as any like serious influence, having any sort of serious influence on the ground when, or like changing the slogan of "From the River to the Sea, Palestine would be free" to mean like we're gonna violently remove all Jews. When even in 2017, 52% of Palestinians said that they wanted a two-state solution. Like, what the fuck are we talking about? Really? You think that's what 52% of Palestinians who said they want a two-state solution, even after everything that had happened thus far? The fact that they were so endlessly charitable to the Israeli government is unimaginable to me. I would not be able to. I'll be honest with you. If a government had historically wronged me in such violent ways and I was living under an apartheid regime, I don't think I'd be as open-minded as Palestinians are to a two-state solution. 100%. I'm sorry. I'll be very honest. I would not. And I don't think you would either, by the way. There's no way you can comprehend that. There's no way you can understand what that's like. You can't. Unimaginable. At that point, it's a means of survival, too. Anyway, let's continue.
Oslo Accords, the first of a series of negotiations that saw the creation of a Palestinian government.
Yeah, I mean, the Oslo Accords were shit. It was always, everything was shit. Everything from the peace process from 1993 onward is shit. And it's literally, like, maybe the major difference here is that, like, at least Palestinians are represented as opposed to not, which is how it went for the longest time. But also, what is this? Barnaby Rain absolutely bodies Rees-Mogg on here. You want to see Barnaby Rain quoting Churchill to Rees-Mogg? Here it is in well worth a watch. Not at least Jacob denying the Palestinians have been ethnically cleansed, and Barnaby then asked him why he thinks Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Okay, we'll do that in a second. Hold on, I got to get my dad food. It wasn't in our best interest at all? No, of course not. I've said this before. I think some Palestinians regard Yasser Arafat as a fake Egyptian lying dog shit CIA asset who sold out the Palestinian population so he could make dollars. Okay? Now, I don't have such words for him. Maybe because I'm looking at the situation from the outside. Now, at that point, they love him, right? At this point, they love him. And there are still plenty of, it's the worst thing that you can call Yasser Arafat is, of course, the worst thing you can call him, Egyptian. Which is what I've heard people call him before. But anyway, I personally think that there is some truth to, obviously, Western involvement, the fact that he always avoided the top of the hour ad break. Okay, and you can too by subscribing for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime. Anyway, what was I saying about Arafat? So, shit. Oh, I do think that he literally saw the writing on the wall. I do think that he saw the writing on the wall and was like, this is the best hand we're ever going to get these motherfuckers. Do you understand? Like, I think the reason why he conceded time and time again, and the reasons as to why he said no to certain key points throughout the negotiations process was quite literally because he recognized, like, this is an inevitability that, like, if there isn't some sort of peace process, that they're fucked. They're completely fucked. So yeah, I don't think he was like a piece of shit American dog who is Egyptian in nationality and Egyptian in soul, who fucked over Palestinians deliberately, even though at the end of the day, Palestinians did get fucked over, but it wasn't because it wasn't Arafat that fucked over Palestinians. It was still Israel. You know what I mean?
And would, people had hoped, begin the path to a two-state solution. Over in Israel, this process was deplored by the right wing. Protests organized by the Likud party and
I mean, dude, even if you look at this, by the way, it's so funny. Even if you look at the Oslo Accords, like fucking Wikipedia page, okay, or Camp David, or any other, I mean, Oslo Accords being what he's discussing here. Even if you look at the conditions, you're like, this is unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. Outline of the peace plan here. Stated goals of the Oslo Accords were, among other things, Palestinian interim self-government, not the Palestinian Authority, but the Palestinian Legislative Council, and a permanent settlement of unresolved issues within 5 years based on Security Council resolutions 242 and 338. Although the agreements recognize the Palestinian legitimate and political rights, they remain silent about their fate after the interim period. The Oslo Accords neither define the nature of the post-Oslo Palestinian self-government and its powers and responsibilities, nor do they define the borders of the territory it would eventually govern. Like, this is the greatest peace deal that you could put together for the Palestinians, really? This is like, that's it? Not to mention Israel never implemented the Oslo Accords fully either, so it doesn't even fucking matter. Israel consistently was like, oh yeah, dude, let's do a deal. Let's do a deal, dog. Come on, let's do a deal. Come on. And then they'd be like, fuck you, no deal. Yeah, we'll do a deal. We'll do a deal. I promise we'll do a deal. Boom, fucking Netanyahu comes in. He's like, deal, get the fuck out of here. Ran against destroying it. Literally waited for the governing boundaries of this deal to eradicate before ever engaging in anything else. It's just, most Palestinians reject the Oslo Accord for understandable reasons, but it was the only genuine effort by Israel towards a two-state solution, and Rabin got murked for it because I need you to understand something here, okay? The conditions of this deal was dog shit, okay? The conditions of this deal was absolutely fucking dog shit. If you listen to Rabin's own words when he talks to the Israeli government, the Israeli Knesset, or Israeli people in general, maybe because he really wanted to get this done and maintain his popularity, okay? Or maybe because he just legitimately didn't think that Palestinians were ever going to get a state, he openly stated time and time again, that it was not going to be a real state. There was not ever going to be a real Palestinian state. I think the term he used was like, what, state negative? Something lesser than a state. I like that Imperialist donated $5, says, hi, I'm Palestinian. 99.99 Palestinians love Yasser Arafat more than anything else. Not true. Come on, dog. And they don't regard him as a fake Egyptian. Also not true. I mean, I have heard that. Most Palestinians, though, think that Arafat did a mistake and was manipulated by signing the Oslo Accords. Also true. As opposed to what this guy said, Rebel 2, Hasanabi, I'm a Palestinian. It's a lie. 52 agreed to two-country solution. And most of us hates Arafat except beneficiaries of the Palestinian Authority. So this part I don't agree with, but this part I do agree with. So a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B for both of you guys, okay? I'm a bit of a centrist. Yeah, both sides, baby. Anyway. Further redeployments of Israeli military forces to specified military locations will commence after the inauguration of the council will be gradually implemented to commensurate the assumption of responsibility for public order and internal security by the Palestinian police. During the further redeployment phases to be completed within 18 months of the date of inauguration of the council, powers and responsibilities relating to the territory will be transferred gradually to Palestinian jurisdiction that will cover West Bank and Gaza Strip territory except for the issues that will be negotiated in the permanent status negotiations. First phase includes withdrawal from areas A and B. Redeployments from Area C would follow in subsequent phases. Area C means areas of the West Bank outside of areas A and B, which, except for the issues that will be negotiated in the permanent status negotiations, will be gradually transferred to the Palestinian jurisdiction in accordance with this agreement. No, the fuck they didn't, though. The issues that will be negotiated were Jerusalem, settlements, specified military locations, Palestinian refugees, borders, foreign relations, and Israelis, and powers and responsibilities not transferred to the council. By excluding Jerusalem and the settlements from the areas to be transferred to the Palestinians, Israeli presence, including military to protect them, would not change without a negotiated agreement. The accords also preserve Israel's exclusive control over the borders, the airspace, and the territorial Gaza waters. Does this seem like a legitimate deal to you? Is the question I must ask. You don't have a standing military. The occupying force that you are negotiating with is saying, you might have an internal police force, okay, with like some level of power, but ultimately you don't have anything. You don't have a right to return is a non-starter for the Palestinians that are outside of Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas didn't agree. First of all, fuck Hamas. Hamas is nothing here. Like, Hamas's agreement or disagreement doesn't mean anything. I also personally believe that Arafat wanted to give anything to the Palestinians, 100%. Surely there was a bit of corruption, as is always the case when dealing with the West. But I think that he did. I do legitimately think that he saw the writing on the wall and tried to do anything and everything he could for any kind of deal, like literally any kind of deal. She believes that he was trying his best to give Palestinians something, and that if it wasn't for him, he might have not even had something to fight for now. Anyway, in order to guarantee public order and internal security for the Palestinians of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Council shall establish a strong police force as set out in Article 14 below. Israel shall continue to carry the responsibility for defense against external threats, including the responsibility for protecting the Egyptian and Jordanian borders. So they don't have any control over their own borders. Israel still maintaining a strong presence at the border, at the Jordanian border with their own military, but also beyond that, they're also not only partitioning areas in the West Bank, but continuing to build settlements, which is a big part of this fucking negotiation, while also taking over additional land for military purpose. So it's completely unacceptable. And for defense against external threats from the sea and air as well. Oh, yeah, it's for national security. The first step was a partial Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho and transfer some of the powers and responsibilities on civil matters to the interim Palestinian Authority, all to agree upon within 2 months from October 1993. Then Israeli troops would withdraw from the populated Palestinian areas, paved the way for Palestinian elections to establish the council. The council will replace Palestinian Authority and the Israeli civil administration in the West Bank and would be dissolved. Further redeployments of Israeli troops would follow upon the inauguration of the council as detailed in Protocol Annex 1 of the Accord. Article 1.5 of Oslo 2 reads, after the inauguration of the council, the civil administration in the West Bank will be dissolved and the Israeli military government shall be withdrawn. 20 years later, however, the withdrawal of Israeli troops did not take place, and the civil administration still has permanent military presence in more than 80% of West Bank and areas B and C. Yeah, this has also been widely considered Treaty of Versailles, Palestine edition. Permanent status negotiations about remaining issues would start not later than May 1996, 2 years after the signing of the Gaza-Jericho Agreement, and would be concluded before May 1999, end of the 5-year interim period. A peace treaty would end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Arafat didn't have real power. He was strutted around as a representative of the Palestinians for the sham of negotiations they had. No, a lot of you that say stuff like this are probably very young. Understandable. You're saying stuff like this because you personally are thinking about it with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, this was very popular. At the time, it was very popular. To say that it wasn't popular is ridiculous. Of course it was popular. The problem is that over the course of a multiple decade process, not only did Yitzhak Rabin get assassinated by far-right Israeli psychopaths, and those who called for his assassination were voted into office over and over again. Benjamin Netanyahu, who literally was doing rallies and told by the internal security to the Shin Bet to stop doing these rallies because there are credible threats on Rabin's life at this point. He refused to do so. And then even after his assassination, openly stated, I would have beat his ass anyway. I'm really fucking mad that they killed him and martyred him. Cold-blooded shit. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, regarded as a major piece of shit by international, like every international politician. So, Oslo was the reason all our Palestinians are completely against the PLO and the Palestinian government at this moment. Okay, so this was the first step. It got significantly worse time and time again. The 2000 Camp David Summit, the U.S. tried to save the Accords by reviving the negotiations. Bullshit. After the failure of the summit, the Second Intifada broke out, and the peace process reached deadlock. So the Second Intifada is where Hamas comes into play, for sure. Because by the end of this, in 2000, at this point, Palestinians went from giving a massive governing mandate to Yasser Arafat in elections that were considered fair and free by international authorities. Now we've gotten to a point where it's like this entire time frame, Israel is mercilessly and ruthlessly expanding and building settlements. The people that the Israeli government is voting into power are psychopaths like Benjamin Netanyahu. So, of course, people are like, well, what the fuck? You put your arms down. There's still going to be people that want to violently fight back. That's where Hamas comes into play. Anyway, where were we on this video? Because this is like from 1993 to 2000, this is where Hamas starts gaining more momentum.
Other right-wing groups depicted Rabin as a Nazi, a murderer, and a traitor. They argued that he was giving up what was rightfully Jewish land and endangering Jewish lives by helping the Palestinians towards statehood. And in 1995,
this is what thank you for finding it, yeah. Seth Onziska argued Oslo provided the vestiges of statehood without actual content, formalizing the ceiling of Palestinian self-rule, pointing to statements from Rabin that referred to a permanent solution of Israel existing alongside a Palestinian entity that was, in Rabin's words, less than a state. Onziska argued the accords were a legacy of Menachem Begin's position or opposition to Palestinian statehood. Edward Said said in an interview, Israel and the Western governments want Arafat to repress certain elements of his society. They want him to be a dictator. The mechanism of peace accord make this very clear. I am for peace. I am for negotiated peace, but this accord is not a just peace. Anyway, let's continue.
The Likud politician Benjamin Netanyahu led an anti-Rabin march which descended into a riot with protesters chanting the words in
a three-state solution? Fuck anyone that says they want a three-state solution. I'm going to lose my fucking mind, dude. Yeah, how about a 10-state solution? How about a 20-state solution? Let's do a 4-state solution. Let's do area A, B, and C. Let's carve that out as well. So that's all 3 different states. And then let's put Gaza as the 4th state. Get the fuck out. And then Israel proper as the 5th state. So how about a 5-state solution? Fuck it. Give Lebanon to Israel too. How about a 1-state solution where Israel owns everything from fucking the river to the sea and also Transjordan and Lebanon? Fuck it. YOLO. Who cares? Am I right? Get the fuck out of here. What do you mean a 3-state solution? Suck my cock. 1 state. That's it. Yeah, give Israel Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan too. What a ridiculous take, dude. 2 states. I'm trying to describe to you that Israel used the dangling of the carrot of the 2-state solution to continuously fucking build settlements and expand into the West Bank and partition the West Bank, which is internationally recognized Palestinian territory, Palestinian land, in an act of unjustifiable settler colonial violence. Okay, these guys are terrorists. They're settler terrorists engaging in an act of settler terrorism while they kept saying like, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. We'll give you 2 states. Thank you, Comrade Leho. Exactly, because the truth is that it's already 1 state. It just needs to be democratic. It's not, there's no 2 different states here. Get the fuck out of here. What kind of autonomy have the Palestinians ever had? They never have had that. It's always been a lie. It's always been 1 state, an apartheid state, a state of Israel that brutally and unjustifiably destroys Palestinians. Some motherfuckers being like, I believe in a 3-state solution. Yeah, okay, dude. Sure. How about 10 states? Fuck it, 50-state solution.
blood and fire we will expel Rabin. When Netanyahu was warned about threats being made on Rabin's life and asked to moderate the tone of the protests, he declined. Later that year, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli ultranationalist after holding a rally in support of the peace process. Was Netanyahu engaging in stochastic terrorism? Discuss below. Hamas, on the other hand, fought against the peace process with actual terrorism. In the early 90s, they decided to borrow a
Okay, see, no, I'm sorry. No. No. I don't agree. I don't agree with that. I think Israel is also engaging in an act of terror by continuing the occupation at this moment. No, I don't agree. Actual terrorism if what Hamas is doing at this point is actual terrorism, which I guess he's like going to start talking about the second Intifada, which is like, terrorism in the way that we understand it from a Western lens, suicide bombings on civilian areas, suicide bombings happening on school buses and shit. That's ridiculous. If that's actual terrorism, then what Israel is doing is infinitely worse. No, I think that Israel at this point is an apartheid state. It certainly is violent in its maintenance of said apartheid state. This reaction to that is coming at the heels of a potential peace process being dangled in front of the Palestinians, but they're not stupid. They see it. They see that this is bullshit. Like the two-state solution is just simply the two-state solution is simply only causing more settlements to be built.
Tactic used by Hezbollah against the Israelis in Lebanon, known as suicide bombing. Their first attempt in 1993 was botched. The bomb had a flawed design which caused the blast to go up instead of out, so the only people who died were the bomber and one innocent Palestinian worker. RIP. But they would succeed with plenty more in the future, and they were soon killing between 30 and 70 people a year within Israel's borders. They publicly took credit for the bombings, describing them as revenge for decades of Palestinian deaths at the hands of Israelis, but
that's true. Like, is that not true? I don't understand. That is true.
For the most part, it didn't sell. In 1996, over 70%.
This part is also true. I'm glad that he's talking about this. Okay.
Of Palestinians opposed the bombings, and support for Hamas fell to 6%. The efforts of Hamas didn't immediately push people away from the peace process, but it did slow things down. And it also succeeded in
No. I mean, he gives like some information. He gives some information that's all true. Like the violent retaliation to Israel in this situation in the hands of Hamas is still unpopular because there's still, in the eyes of Palestinians, like regardless of how shitty the fucking deal is, there's still a potential for peacemaking, potential for deal making. And every single time that this happened, in every single circumstance, there is a tremendous amount of violence that the Israeli state is subjecting Palestinians to that just completely gets lost here. If you only talk about what Hamas is doing at this point, you're skipping a shit ton of violence that Palestinians who are engaging in an act of civil disobedience are getting subjected to. The first Intifada was fucking ruthless, and so was the second Intifada. I don't agree with this. The first Intifada was brutal to the Palestinian population, even without like the random indiscriminate acts of murder, which also happened. Tens of thousands of people were severely, gravely wounded. And then also, there's another point here that is very important. I mean, I don't know what part he's talking about between 1993 and 2005, but the mosque shooting of Baruch Goldstein going into the mosque and shooting 29 people praying, throwing a fucking grenade and like wounding, I forget how many people he wounded, but there's a shit ton of incredibly gross, incredibly violent actions that take place in this time frame. I mean, this is, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair to look at this as though it's like, oh, well, some guys were like, I hate peace. I'm going to fucking blow up a school bus or some shit. Like, that's not true. If you watch this, would you assume Israel literally did anything? Yeah. I mean, my takeaway, if I didn't know exactly what was going on, if I wasn't aware of the history, I would literally leave this thinking, well, Israel was pretty fair to the Palestinians. It does seem like, maybe they were like lying a little bit in the negotiations process, at least so far. Maybe he'll change up after. But yeah, I don't know. Two good vids on the Intifada.
You heard the term Intifada.
The first Intifada, when nonviolent protests turned violent, history of Israel explained. I like that the first Intifada, the first Intifada, fine. Second Intifada, age restricted. Because that is what happened. That is literally what happened. They went from like strikes and stone throwing to age restricted shit. Yeah, killed 29 and injured 125 in the mosque attack. And yes, Israel's retaliation to the first Intifada was insane. Okay, I don't agree with. I think that there's a lot more on this video. I think it's like historically accurate. I wouldn't say it's historically inaccurate, but I think it's good. I think it's a good video to give you like some of the basics, but it certainly is a good video to give you the basics if you know the history beyond just like what you're hearing in this video, because I do think that the framing of this makes it seem as though like Israel is kind of bad at times, but nowhere near as ruthless as they actually were.
Connecting the Gazan population from the state of Israel. In the mid-80s, nearly half of the people in Gaza had permits to...
What? Oh, why'd you ban that guy? Chatters, he had a really good take. Funeral Leech says, Hasan, I'm getting tired of your immoral, pseudo-intellectual, populist propaganda and deception. Hamas murdering mothers and kidnapping their children is terrorism by definition, not resistance. Israel murdering children and kidnapping mothers, on the other hand, is perfectly valid and also dealing with terrorism and not an act of terror, even though Israel is the apartheid state in this circumstance. And those who live under an apartheid state are simply supposed to take it up the ass the entire time and never actually fucking do anything. That human beings are supposed to literally sit there and go, oh, thank you. Thank you for destroying me. Thank you for killing my fucking uncle. Thank you for killing my entire family. This is perfectly cool. God forbid, I am a human being and recognize that like these conditions that I've been subjected to are brutal as fuck and there's no way out of it. Okay? You're so biased that you can't even call Hamas a terrorist organization. You're not any better than the conservatives you hate so much, and you're not speaking for the innocent civilians in Gaza, whereas Funeral Leech is. Funeral Leech, on the other hand, is speaking for the innocent civilians in Gaza, which I assume just simply, unfortunately, have to die by the thousands, right? Let's see. I like that we're literally talking about the conditions that created. I like that we're talking about the conditions that quite literally created Hamas. And this motherfucker's answer to this is like, it's really fucked up that you think that people are, it's really fucked up that you think people can't just like vote away apartheid when they have no fucking voting rights. And that, why are you putting up so many straw mans? Me? Oh, you're talking about that guy. No, I unbanned him because I want to hear I want to hear more wonderful takes from this guy because he's got a lot.
To work in Israel, and unemployment was rarely higher than 5%. But by the mid-2000s, in response to the bombings, the number of permit holders fell to less than 7%. And by this point, in the wake of the Second Intifada, the peace process between Israel and the PLO was as good as dead, and Hamas became increasingly prominent. When Israel pulled out of southern Lebanon, it was widely believed
even in the Second Intifada, it wasn't that fucking...
that they were pushed out by Hezbollah, and Palestinians became increasingly convinced that violence would have a better chance of winning their freedom.
Wait, what happened? There's an upper limit. Okay, that is actually unironically exactly what they saw. That is what happened. Yes. In the eyes of the Palestinians, they were like, we had 2 decades of fuck you from peace negotiations with the Israelis. The Americans don't have our fucking backs, even though, you know, Arafat and the Americans are chummy. Okay? And the only time Israel's actually dialed back their indiscriminate violence, literally, it was because there was a successful resistance movement. Why the fuck would Palestinians look at that and go, well, we're trying to deal with you peacefully and look what you're doing to us? Meanwhile, those motherfuckers are not, and they succeeded. Why would they ever look at the situation and go, yeah, we should keep doing the peaceful thing?
Freedoms. Though a majority of them still opposed Hamas's suicide attacks, the number was markedly lower than it had been 10 years earlier. In 2000,
come on, dude. Yeah. 52% still say suicide attacks are unjustifiable. Come on. And at that point, there's like nothing remaining. There's not, what do they have? They got nothing. Oh, dude. I mean, those numbers, if anything, those numbers literally show the majority still were against against these acts of violence. There was no period of time prior to 1948 that the Arab Palestinian population had sovereignty over what we know as Israel today. Oh, dude, Hasbara talking points are popping off. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay? Before 1948, there's no fucking Israel either. Suck my dick, bitch. Fuck you mean? Before 1948, you know what it was called? Isn't real, dog. That's what it was fucking called, dumb fuck. Palestinians had more of a historical reason to engage in a post-colonial nation-state building project that the British fucking promised them than Israel did. What the fuck are you talking about, dumb bitch? Suck my dick. What a stupid fucking take. Oh, and they didn't have a nation state. Like, as though all of these countries hadn't been, like, recently formed anyway. What the fuck was happening? What was happening? Yeah, there was no India before 47 either. Like, you're so stupid. Shut up. Then, let's continue. Palestine was not a state. There was no states! Half the states were not a state! What do you mean? Half the states were not states until, like, recently. Stupid. None of this still means that you can build Israel there, okay? There was people there. The entire war has been built on a simple deceptive lie. You're talking about Islamophobia, anti-Islam, but not a word about anti-Semitism. Yes, dude, totally. Yeah. I definitely never talk about anti-Semitism. Listen, you dumb fuck. I talk about anti-Semitism all the goddamn time. What the fuck are you talking about? As a matter of fact, if you look at, like, the last 10 years of me doing political commentary, I've probably talked about anti-Semitism more than I've talked about Palestine. Okay? Anti-Semitism is gross. Don't try to fucking cynically tie me to any kind of fucking anti-Semitic sentiment here. Israel has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. You can criticize Israel in an anti-Semitic way, certainly. Some people who honestly criticize Israel might have anti-Semitic opinions, certainly. Okay? I'm not one of them. So the fact that you would come in here and try to cynically do this fucking nonsensical bullshit is because you're out of arguments. You have no arguments. That's why. You have one fucking ripcord that you can pull, which is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism. You're doing anti-Semitism. Suck my dick. I'm facing so much racism right now as an ethnically Jewish atheist. Your fans are sending me hateful messages right now. Oh my God. I should have never read that last part. That's so fucking stupid. No, people are sending you hate because you're a fucking dumbass, dude. Not because you're Jewish. And before you fucking act like there's bad faith actors in here who are banned but can still probably whisper your fucking stupid ass, okay? We ban anti-Semitism of all forms, okay? That's precisely the reason why you don't have anything to point to, so you just fucking laughably just go, oh, that's kind of anti-Semitic. You've never mentioned anti-Semitism. How the fuck would people ever know that you're Jewish, by the way? Like, what a ridiculous thing. You're an anonymous account. How awesome. Meanwhile, motherfuckers like, wow, I really hate the Islamophobia. You only talk about Islamophobia. It's like, brother, do you know how much I get called Hasanabi? Like, where do you think that comes from? Like, why do you think that? Like, how many times do I have to fucking condemn Hamas's actions on October 7th? Doesn't matter. At a certain point, it seems like you don't give a fuck. You know what I mean? You're going to still say I'm Hasanabi. Motherfucker said Palestine wasn't a state in 1948, dude. Sick. The new neolib talking point is the Palestine wasn't a state. But that's not even a new talking point. That's just like old-ass Hasbara shit. You know how many times I've fucking heard that? I know you're not a big fan of Netanyahu, okay? I know. Everyone says that. Every liberal Zionist goes, me. I hate Netanyahu, actually. And then fucking turns around and goes, I'm going to unconditionally support what he's doing in Gaza, though, because we have to. Shut the fuck up. Explain to me why you don't like Netanyahu without using selfish reasons like his right-wing coalition. He's personally corrupt and self-interested, and his right-wing coalition are taking away my civil liberties, but I have nothing to say about the apartheid state. I just don't like him. I don't like him aesthetically. Also, we have to kill children in Gaza. You don't understand. Those are human shields. We have to liberate Gaza from speaking for the innocent civilians in Gaza. We have to kill them, is what you said. It's so funny. It's like, Hasan, why are you cursing me? What? I'm not cursing you. I'm just sick and tired of motherfuckers constantly being like, oh, I hate Netanyahu, but also we have to eradicate Hamas. When this has been the talking point for the past, since 2005, this is the talking point. We got to eradicate Hamas. 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 So what? What is it? every single time they go in and they fucking blow shit up and kill children, Hamas isn't getting eradicated. Why is it that so many of you understand the denazification protocols that Russia engaged in was completely ridiculous, but when it comes to fucking eradicating Hamas, denazifying the Gaza Strip, then it's like, I love that shit. That is extremely my shit. Israel is denazifying the Gaza Strip. Get the fuck out of here. Israel's killed more fucking children than Russia has even. And Russia is a brutal occupying force, engaging in completely unjustifiable acts. I never for one fucking second in my life did I ever say that Russia is actually denazifying Ukraine. Time and time again, I said the exact opposite will happen if you invade Ukraine. So how can I understand that? And how can you understand that for Ukraine, but you can't fucking wrap your head around that when it comes to Hamas? It's crazy. Okay, now you're just shadowboxing. Who are you talking about? Who was saying Ukraine? Because I know what he would say about Ukraine. I know where these idiotic takes come from. Absolutely zero people unironically believe, I hope, I never did, that Russia was going to denazify Ukraine by attacking Ukraine. I think that Netanyahu is racist, and I don't like the fact that he sits with Orthodox Jews in the government, but come on, how is Israel not a democracy when you can literally vote for the far left and anti-Zionist parties such as Hadash and United Arab List? I don't know. Here's a good example. I don't just fucking read Wikipedia pages on my broadcast. I actually talk to members of Hadash. If you weren't such a dumb fuck, you would probably know that. And if you ask them, or at least Ofer Kasif, they would tell you that Israel is an apartheid, that Israel is a fascist apartheid state. So why don't you fucking do a little bit more research? What's new? Palestinian flags were kicked out of the democracy protests we've had since early 2023. Our left is hypocritical. Hate Netanyahu, by the way. Exactly. I hear this so much, but it's like, come on, dog. I'm obviously pro-Ukraine. There you go. I knew it. I am too. So what's up? Do you think Russia was actually denazifying Ukraine? Do you think Russia successfully denazified Ukraine? Or do you think they just simply used that as a reason to fucking do land grabs and occupy a country that they could not potentially occupy, really, realistically? So why is it that if you can understand that, why can't you fucking understand when Netanyahu's government or even the liberals, the centrists say we have to eradicate Hamas? Everyone goes, oh, dude, you're so right. That's how we're going to denazify the Gaza Strip. By the way, it's so funny that you said, hilarious that you said Israel is a democracy and then used Hadash when considering that, like, Ofer Kasif was literally expelled for saying the exact same things that the Haaretz editorial board said. He was expelled. You would know any of these things instead of like watching fucking weirdo debate pervert liberal streamers. If you like read something else, please. And I say this to my audience all the time, read. Okay? Read. It's good. It's good to read. It's good to read a broad variety of different resources to develop a better perspective. You cannot say Israel is a democracy because Israel is a Jewish ethno-state that is also an apartheid state. You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. Israel's not even a fucking democracy with full-blown rights for Palestinians living in Israel. Get the fuck out of here with this Israel is a democracy shit. And those guys at least have significantly more rights than the 5 million Palestinians that are living in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip that are currently being occupied. In Gaza, they're being bombed into oblivion. Their schools are being destroyed. UN schools are being fucking destroyed. Hospitals are being destroyed. Babies are being fucking ruthlessly slaughtered over the course of the past 30 fucking days. And in the West Bank, there's pogroms. Hundreds of people have been slaughtered by both settlers themselves in direct acts of violence, Molotov cocktails being thrown in to people's homes, people being forcibly removed from certain areas, certain villages, and the IDF just looks around and defends the settlers because they don't have any legal reason to defend the Palestinians because the Palestinians have no fucking rights. So no, it is not a fucking democracy. Russia started the war. I'm obviously pro-Ukraine. Russia started the war, ... Brother, I know. You're failing to understand because your head is stuck so far up your fucking asshole that you literally don't recognize that Russia's arguments in denazifying Ukraine was bullshit. It was a bullshit reason to start the war. Just like Israel's arguments in denazifying the Gaza Strip, like cleansing Hamas of the Gaza Strip, is also a bullshit reason. It's not a real reason. Unless you literally think Hamas, and October 7th is the first time anything happened in the history of Israel. Russia started the war, and Hamas also started the war. Checkmate, terrorist. Yeah, dude, I know. Listen. Brother, I've talked to liberal Zionists so many fucking times. I know the talking points, okay? I did not say the IDF or angels, Hassan, but there's a difference between shooting unarmed civilians and bombing your enemy. No, there isn't. No. Until you give Hamas guided munitions, okay, and an air force, and the entire population registry of Israel proper, and then they fucking bomb hospitals in the same way that they're fucking lobbing missiles indiscriminately into Israel because there's like bathtub missiles, you can't even make this fucking equivalence. Unless you literally are saying babies are your enemy. Israel's greatest enemy, babies. Israel's greatest enemy, the press. My enemy is the cancer ward. Also, I love that you said there's a difference between shooting unarmed civilians and bombing your enemy. Meanwhile, the IDF is shooting unarmed civilians in the West Bank, okay? And the IDF is bombing their enemy in Gaza. The settlers in the West Bank are obviously horrible. Yeah, but you'll do nothing about it, okay? You'll do nothing about it. You never have done anything about it, and you won't do anything about it. You'll just complain. You'll say, oh, it's really bad, but what am I to do? And then you'll come in here and go, wow, you're actually, no, he's not concerned trolling. I don't think he's concerned. I don't think this chatter is concerned trolling. He comes across as a liberal Zionist, in my opinion. Like someone who says, yeah, settlement expansion in the West Bank is horrible. It's completely unjustifiable because it fucking is. But Israel's not an apartheid state, which also is wrong. Israel is an apartheid state. You can't have you can't have it both ways. You can't on the one hand be like, well, technically settlements are fucking horrible, but then also simultaneously be like, but Israel's not an apartheid state. Those settlements didn't materialize out of thin air. They were created. They were literally paid for and defended by the Israeli government in a deliberate act of partitioning parts of the West Bank. Why are there checkpoints everywhere? Obviously, the IDF should make sure the civilians of Gaza are not killed, but that's a different topic. If we can't agree that Hamas is a terrorist organization, then I have nothing to add. No, you just keep going back to Hamas, and terrorism, okay? What Hamas did on October 7 is terrorism. What Israel does every fucking day in the maintenance of an apartheid regime is also terrorism. Significantly worse terrorism, both by metrics and also in general. Hamas is a violent retaliation, an act of terror, because the colonizing force, the actual militarized state, sets the standards of violence in this regard. That's why, if you know anything about Israeli history, which I'm sure you do, the first Intifada and the second Intifada were fought in dramatically different terms. Okay? Like, you can't constantly resort back to condemn Hamas, it's terrorism, it's terrorism. I already have, time and time again. Anyway. Speaking of which, from Haaretz, Steinberg, who during those years served as the Shin Bet's head advisor on Palestinian affairs, argues that Hamas's transition from focusing on suicide bombings against military targets in the territories to civilian targets with the Green Line stemmed directly from the Goldstein massacre. If you can't understand how people get radicalized into engaging in ruthless and incredibly violent acts of terror due to constantly living under an apartheid regime, and then also on top of that having, extrajudicial acts of violence, I don't know what to tell you. Think about it from how angry, Hasan, I'll keep watching you. I do appreciate your content. Okay, well then understand this. Understand one thing. If you are Israeli, because I think you might be, you sound like a liberal Zionist. I don't think like most people would know to say these things unless they at least like had some understanding of the situation, unless you're like directly repeating talking points you heard from someone else. Understand this. The hatred that you feel in your heart towards Palestinians, the Palestinians have every right to feel in their hearts towards Israelis. Okay? Towards Israel. Like, of course. If you can understand how you learned to fucking hate Palestinians, then you can understand how they learned to hate literally Israel as an occupying force. Okay? And in that situation, one side controls everything. The other side has nothing. That's my perspective. I want to reach a plane I want to reach a situation where there's we're comparing the moral boundaries that we place upon a violent emancipatory group that is understandably declared a terror organization due to their targeting of civilians, okay, in comparison to a militarized state with a motherfucking nuke that literally is maintaining an apartheid state. It's ridiculous. If you can't comprehend that, I don't know what to tell you. You learn to hate Palestinians, okay, due to their reaction to the violent apartheid regime. They learn to hate you because you've been fucking them over nonstop. I love when there's like on Israeli television, they talk about like UN schools, like they're teaching Palestinian children to hate Jews, to hate Israel. And I'm like, no, dog, they don't need to go to school to fucking learn how to hate Jewish people or Israel. Okay? They learn that when their school gets blown up. Like, what do you mean? You learn to hate the Palestinians at school and from a one-sided way of understanding the history of Israel. You have to learn to hate because there's no other way to justify an apartheid state. Because most people, when removed of their biases, obviously want peace. Like that's our natural predisposition. We are not violent. We want to cooperate. That's how history works. So the only way that you can justify the maintenance of an apartheid is by learning constantly to hate and dehumanize your opposition. Buddy, no one is listening to this rant, pal. I mean, you're in here. You, pal, 0 bitches. Hasan, please get some bitches on your dick, bro. Take it to the press, pal. Buddy, no one is listening. You are the yapper. Okay, that guy's funny. See, I called it. I live in Israel. That's why my English is not great. I didn't serve in the IDF, by the way. I got profile 21. Anyway, so heed my words. Let's continue with this video now.
5. Israel unilaterally disengaged from Gaza and the 8,000 Jewish settlers who lived there were evacuated by the IDF. The pullout was done with no negotiations or input from the Palestinian side, and this allowed Hamas to push the line that Israel had been forced out by terrorist violence. And whilst this wasn't 100% true, it was true enough for an effective PR campaign. In 2006, Hamas
Wait, what?
Forced out by terrorist violence. And whilst this wasn't 100% true, it was true enough for an effective PR campaign. In 2006, Hamas defeated Fatah in the parliamentary elections. Now, this victory...
Yeah, with 3% of the vote. Now, part of the reason why was because in a lot of these elections, there were multiple secular options that split the vote. Multiple Fatah options even, if I'm not mistaken. But multiple secular alternatives that took away from the vote, whereas Hamas was the new player in the field with newfound political prominence and a anti-corruption mandate. Because at this point in 2006, everyone's like, all right, this shit fucking sucks, okay? These motherfuckers, they don't give a shit. They don't care about us. They don't want to fucking deal with us. They just want to fucking kill us. Now, this election in and of itself, for the record, this election in and of itself was only done because George W. Bush wanted it to happen, okay? At the time, Fatah and the Palestinian Authority literally told them not to have this election, okay? They were like, don't do this. We're not ready. We're not ready for an election. Hamas is going to fucking cook us. Everybody thinks we're collaborationist pieces of shit because we kind of are.
Is often interpreted as a Palestinian mandate for terror and rejectionism, although this is not necessarily the case. An exit poll from the election found that most voters...
This is pretty fair. His assessment here is fair.
...actually opposed Hamas's...
Yeah, look at that. Should Hamas change its policies regarding Israel? Yes. 75%. Support for a peace agreement with Israel, 80% in support. So suck me. At that point, motherfuckers are not voting for Hamas because they're like, we love Islam. We love Islamist fundamentalism. We fucking personally love blowing up Israeli school buses. Not the case.
Policies towards Israel and were in favor of pursuing a peace agreement. Instead, it looked like Hamas's victory was really owed to a desire to end government corruption. The leaders of Fatah were very corrupt. Fun fact, their leader, Mahmoud Abbas, currently has a higher net worth than Netanyahu. Whoa. And Hamas would turn out to be very corrupt too, but they were at this point able to project an image of trustworthiness due to their religiosity and their origins as a charity. But here, there was a problem. For one, Israel, the United States, and the European Union all refused to deal with the Hamas government. Abbas, who had just been elected president a year earlier, wanted to uphold the PA's recognition of Israel, something which Hamas refused to accept. The result was that any unity government of the two parties would have been unable to negotiate with Israel or their Western partners. The two parties repeatedly failed to reach an agreement, and in 2007, they went to war.
Okay, that's not what happened. The United States of America facilitated a coup after their failed election because they thought Fatah would be able to win, despite the fact that Fatah leadership personally told the United States that would not happen. They would lose the election. Then they were like, oopsie, okay, let's do a fucking coup. They literally tortured a bunch of Hamas people. And then guess what the fuck happened? Hamas seized control over the entirety of Gaza because of the American-facilitated coup d'etat.
Hamas ended up seizing the Gaza Strip and establishing a de facto government in the enclave, which remains to this day.
Was the shit of it Hamas leaders being rich true? Sounds way too sus. Yes, Hamas leadership is also very wealthy, and so is the fucking... is it bad girl time? Are you being a bad bitch? I would pick you up on my lap, but I'm scared because you're bleeding everywhere. You're free bleeding. She's up to mischief. In Arabic world, we would call Mahmoud Abbas, Mahmoud As. What? As.
So from here on, we have two separate governing bodies in Gaza and the West Bank, both more or less at war with each other and both exerting authoritarian rule over their territories. Abbas has refused to hold elections since 2006.
Okay, except these guys are doing it at the behest of Israel. There's also an important distinction to make. These guys are doing it at the behest of Israel. These guys are doing it for their own personal interest, certainly. But these guys at least have, due to complete control over Gaza, except for the fact that, like, you know, they don't have any commerce and Israel controls all matter of trade and everything that's going in and out of the Gaza Strip. They at least have like a semblance of civil governance that they have to engage in. They literally have to engage in some semblance of civil governance. They have to. It's an incredibly chaotic, volatile situation. If they don't actually at this point engage in some kind of civil governance, then they're fucked because some other group is going to take over, right? They don't have any real authority, but with the limited amount of authority they have over the Gaza Strip, they work on, one, creating a structure where they can violently respond to Israel every time, because everyone is at this point completely given up on the West Bank protecting the interests of Palestinians, Fatah protecting the interests of Palestinians. So every single time Israel decides to fucking, you know, squeeze the Palestinians further, every single time Israel chooses to squeeze the Palestinians further in the West Bank, the violent retaliation comes from Gaza. This is also pushing more Palestinians in the hands of Hamas in general, seeing them as the only violent emancipatory reaction. Now here's why it's important. Make no mistake, if you think that like Palestinians think that they're going to fucking kill everyone in Israel, you're fucking delusional, okay? That's not the point, nor is it the purpose. The purpose is to say, you cannot consistently occupy us without a fucking price. That's why they're doing terrorism. Do you understand? It's not like there's no real fucking way of like violently wiping out everyone in Israel. Nobody fucking thinks that. Hamas doesn't think that. They can say whatever the fuck they want from the comfort of Lebanon or from Doha or wherever, but it doesn't matter. There's nobody literally thinks that they're going to fucking kill every person in Israel. They simply believe that if you consistently maintain this, no, they don't understand, but thank you for saying it. Oh, you mean people don't understand this? Yes. People love creating this notion that like, yeah, dude, they want to just do genocide. They want to do genocide endlessly. Yeah, Ben Shapiro thinks that because he's a fucking psycho. No, The goal isn't to do fucking genocide. No, nor is, I don't know, Hamas's own personal interest in the matter. I don't think, I mean, they updated their charter, but I don't really personally believe that, like, they, if given the opportunity, if they had any kind of real power, would be interested in, like, a secular democratic state, even though they do claim in their new charter that they do. But who gives a shit what they want? What matters is what the people want. Okay? But the reason as to why so much of the actual public discourse on Palestine is just racist fantasies is genuinely disturbing. I mean, it's much easier to justify anything and everything you want to do to the Palestinian population if you think that they're all a monolith. All Arabs are a monolith and they're all violent and they're all violent Jew haters. Like, then, boom. It's super easy to just be like, yeah, maybe we can turn the other way when we're engaging in ethnic cleansing. Okay? Yes, secularism is incredibly popular among the Palestinian population. That's what matters.
Over in Gaza, Hamas has maintained a stranglehold over the population. Their extensive use of imprisonment and torture against dissenters is well documented. Like their counterparts in the West Bank, they are notoriously corrupt, with their leaders living luxuriously between Doha and Turkey, whilst the unemployment rate in Gaza...
Yeah, the only difference is, like, you know, that guy's fucking family members still get slaughtered in Gaza, okay? Like, that's just, you know, something to consider. And also, ultimately, the real stranglehold still comes from the occupying power, okay? Israeli here, I don't know if you know about this. If you don't, really shit. I saw in Israeli media some boomers got booted out of Gaza when Israel pulled out of it, are now dreaming to return to their homes in Gaza. So there could be some very well settlements in Gaza again, and everything will settle down. I say some. I don't know actually the numbers. Yeah, no, I've seen that as well. Yeah, I've seen that, and I've seen the top of the hour ad break, which comes at the top of every hour. If you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or free with the Twitch Prime. No. Starting to be a little, you're starting to be a little baby right now. I don't like that. Can you train her? I mean, she's fine. I took her out of, there's too much movement happening. March is here, and like a bunch of people are here looking at the studio. So she like wants to go and check what's happening over there. You know what I mean?
Rarely falls below 40%. But Gaza's economic issues go far deeper than just corruption. As soon as they took control, it was clear that Hamas intended to turn the enclave into a base from which they could launch attacks into Israel. After the takeover, Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade over the Strip as a way to stop them from importing weapons, and also any secondary materials that could be used to make weapons. Just by their own admission alone, we know that they have the capacity to produce their own weapons with support from Iran. We know that when Gazan infrastructure gets destroyed...
Yeah, no, I think that's bullshit too. Again, like, that's what Israel claims, and that's the reason why they have a blockade, but that's not the real reason why they have a blockade. Israel, on its own admission, has said that we want to put the Palestinians on a diet when talking about what kind of food is allowed, or what the daily caloric requirements come out to. That's bullshit. I don't agree with that. Straight up. I don't agree with that at all. Like, no. I think that's ridiculous. Does Hamas utilize anything and everything they have in their power to create weapons? Absolutely. Do they still sneak in by way of Egypt or Egyptian tunnels? Sneak in weapons? Absolutely. Okay. But the idea that like Israel's blockade is somehow justifiable is incorrect. It's not correct whatsoever. No. Why do you think a lot of U.S. liberals can obsess over social justice in the U.S. but completely be okay with the genocide of Palestinian people? Islamophobia. Very powerful tool. Dude, stop fucking sending me the Sabra and Shatila thing. No, that's not a real fucking tweet. Shut the fuck up. Shut up. Stop. What's the official Israeli line for insane food restrictions? Putting the Palestinians on a diet. I told you.
By Israeli airstrikes, the remains will get recycled into weapons. And we know that they will sometimes dig up old water pipes and turn them into rockets.
Yeah, the water pipe video is a famous one that everybody always loves using. Those water pipes, and I know LonerBox knows this because I watched his other video where he talked about it, are unironically water pipes that no longer have water in them that were going directly to the settlements that Israel cut off. I've seen him talk about this. You can make some rockets with the PVC, as I found out. I didn't know that you can make any rockets whatsoever, but you can make some like small, not really meaningful ones. But you don't disagree with this, by the way. He's literally lying. It's not a matter of opinion or disagreeing. It's a matter of fact. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Israel's blockade is completely and utterly unjustifiable. There are many different moments in which Israel could have offered dignity and humanity to the Palestinian population, and refusal to do so is how Hamas gained at least enough momentum and captured the attention of enough Palestinians to win the elections. Then also a failed coup permanently solidified their position in Palestine. At any given point, Israel could have also still turned around and allowed elections to occur, but they never did. So there's also that aspect of the conversation that needs to take place as well. Anyway,
yeah, they're pretty creative when it comes to making weapons. And as a result of this, even foreign aid imports to Gaza are treated with caution. Keep that point in mind for later. With Hamas...
Also, yeah, if the blockade was effective, then October 7th would have never happened. That's the worst. That's the point of consideration that many Israelis forget, okay? That's the thing that many Israelis and many Zionists in general globally fucking forget. That, like, all of this is an abject failure, okay? All of this is an abject failure. It's like looking at a fucking prison riot and being like, wow, they made shanks out of fucking toothbrushes. It's like, yeah, of course. Of course they did. What do you mean? They're in prison. What are you talking about? They can't do shit. So clearly, collective punishment, which straight up led to this level of influence to begin with. Okay, Lamau, bye. All right, sure. Say Lamau, bye. All day, every day. Given his citations, he read the truth, but is refuted and repeated, and instead making an excuse for the Israeli occupation. I don't even think that he's making an excuse for the Israeli occupation, but I think that there is a consideration here that falls on the Israeli side. I think he is showing it's impossible to show the situation as a just one. It's not, especially if you're honestly describing events that took place. There are certain points where he is omitting information, in my opinion, to not come across as like openly anti-Israel. But in this 100-year history, there's a lot of aspects that there's a lot of aspects of the story that I think get left out in his argument. That certainly makes it seem like Israel is maybe not a small being, but like had to do this stuff. And the security concerns have always been the reason why Israel justifies what it does. So, in my opinion, stating that without talking about how fucking utterly ridiculous and inhumane it is, okay, is basically doing, a Israeli propaganda, pretty much. A blockade has been imposed by Israel and Egypt on the movement of goods and people in and out of Gaza Strip since 2005. After Hamas' takeover in 2007, the blockade aimed to isolate Hamas and prevent smuggling of weapons into Gaza. But the blockade predates, not only does the blockade predate Hamas, but also Israel blew up the fucking airport in 2001. Why the fuck were they not allowed to have an airport ever again? Where was Hamas then? Like, they were marginal at best, still. But they were still being propped up as the major reason, right? I'm just saying, it's like, come on.
Now launching attacks into Israel, the work permit scheme in Gaza was almost completely wiped out, and the 6 border crossings into the country have been regularly closed. And ultimately, the Gazan economy and the people working in the enclave are the ones who pay the cost. For one example, in 2006, when a border crossing was closed after an attack, farmers were unable to get their goods out to international buyers. Stranded at the border, they eventually had to dump their produce into a field.
Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, come on. This is not Hamas that's doing this. You can't just say like this is Hamas's doing. This is Hamas's doing because like Israel's security concerns are valid here. Like, I don't even think he believes that.
And leave it to get eaten up by goats. But the biggest new feature of Hamas coming to power in Gaza has been the wars, of which there have been quite a few. Usually, these wars will start with either a rocket barrage from Gaza or...
No, that's not how they start. I don't think that's how they start. I don't think that the wars start because Hamas out of nowhere is just like, all right, time to fucking send rockets into Israel. That's not how that works. Time and time again, first of all, the 2018 border protest is a great example. Holy fuck, the way that they describe this is insane on Wikipedia. Jesus Christ. I never read Wikipedia pages for this kind of stuff, but god damn. During the 2018 Land Day protests, 168 Palestinians have been killed and thousands were injured during clashes with Israeli troops at the Gaza-Israel border. They weren't clashes, man. Those were the Israeli snipers just opening up fire on fucking children and pregnant women and nurses and shit. What the fuck? Dude. Okay. I did say originally that if you look at Wikipedia, given how brutal and unjustifiable the Israeli occupation is, like, it's almost impossible for you to arrive at the conclusion that Israel is in the right in any capacity. But maybe I'm wrong, okay? Because holy fuck, that's crazy. Like 10,000 people were gravely wounded by sniper rifle fire. It was not a fucking clash. It was like Israel's always just murking people, like civilians, and then being like, it's a clash. Every single instance, like you can point to like geopolitical concerns in the region to why Hamas operates in the way that they do. But in the overwhelming majority of rocket fire into Israel, okay? Rocket fire into Israel, it's always an act of retaliation to something that Israel is doing that many members of the Israeli security forces openly keep telling, just like before October 7th, the Shin Bet did, openly keep telling the Israeli government, hey, stop fucking murking people in the West Bank. You're really going to piss the Palestinians off. It's going to be a security concern. It's going to be a security issue. This is going to be a matter of national security. How is Wikipedia not a good way to get an overview of something? I mean, I think it's a decent way, but I mean, this is like I just showed you why this is like a ridiculously biased way to look at the situation. You can be easily misled, it seems. The Great March of Return has been what? This page was last edited 28th of April. Wait, why is it 2018-2019 Gaza border protests, also known as the Great March of Return? Most of them demonstrated peacefully far from the border fence. Peter Kamak, a fellow with the Middle East program at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, argued that the march indicated a new trend in Palestinian society and Hamas with a shift away from violence towards nonviolent forms of protest. It's true. They tried it and they got fucking killed. Nevertheless, groups consisted of mainly young men approached the fence and committed acts of violence directed towards the Israeli side. What? The Israeli officials said the demonstration was used by Hamas as a cover for launching attacks against Israel. What do you mean? Like they threw rocks when the Israeli snipers started opening fire. What violence? Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, see, I mean, that's ridiculous. Israeli officials said the demonstration was used by Hamas as a cover for launching attacks against Israel. Oh, never mind then. IDF warns of larger military response. Oh, God, Jerusalem Post. The Gaza wars often begin as a result of a chain of events. In 2014, war started after 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped and killed. A Palestinian teenager was then kidnapped by Israelis and killed, and large-scale arrests then occurred in the West Bank. Rockets were then fired by Hamas, and the operation began. Yeah. Except, ultimately, given the consequence of existing under an apartheid state, it's always still in the hands of Israel to not have any violence whatsoever. This citation is from Jerusalem Post. IDF warns of larger military response to Gaza protests. Israeli military spokesman Brigadier General Ronen Manelis said Hamas, which controls Gaza, was using protests as a guise to launch attacks against Israel. Oh, okay. Never mind then. Shit, dude. I guess if Jerusalem Post and is covering the IDF spokesman, then that must be what's going on. Anyway, but yeah, all of these clashes, if you want to look at a whodunit, okay, there are circumstances where there are situations where let's say there are additional geopolitical considerations at play, and Hamas engages as as a way to disrupt whatever is going on in the region. But beyond that, almost all of these rocket attacks, almost all of them, oftentimes happen as a consequence of hostage swaps, that come at the heels of like 10,000 people being held under unjustifiable detainment in the apartheid state, or rocket fire being sent into Israel, 90% of which gets intercepted by, American taxpayer-funded Iron Dome defense. And then Israel turns around and punishes ruthlessly with disproportionate violence. Yeah, the UN Human Rights Watch has a report on this protest. They dispute any attacks from Hamas and say over 6,000 unarmed civilians were sniped, disproportionately targeting the disabled and children. It's also outrageous to childishly talk about who started it and ignore the ongoing occupation. Of course. No, I agree. Anyway, let's continue.
An Israeli raid on Hamas's extensive tunnel networks underneath the Strip. Israel typically responds with airstrikes with the stated goals of stopping the rockets, stopping the smuggling of arms, and taking out as much of Hamas's military infrastructure as they can.
Exactly. And they've done so time and time again. And for some reason, Hamas's influence or its firepower grows. Perhaps there's a different way to deal with this problem if you actually want a permanent security assurance. Because you cannot keep bombing areas that you personally occupy, areas that you personally have complete control over. It is like incredibly densely populated as well. Here, this is where this comes into play. Here's Barnaby Rain.
2.2 million people penned into an open-air prison in Gaza. The significant majority of those people are not from Gaza. They're refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948. Now, I know that the people you admire are fine with that. Winston Churchill said he didn't mind when a superior race displaced an inferior one. No. That's how he talked about what happened in Palestine. But some of us feel from all over Britain...
Most of the people... you've had plenty of... Most of the people living in Israel have had to go there fleeing persecution where they lived, and mainly persecution in the Middle East.
No, actually, that's not true.
That's crazy. Dog, the Holocaust happened. What the fuck are you saying, big homie? God damn it, dude. Yes, I know who Jacob Rees-Mogg is. He's one of the absolute worst. If there was a fucking freak that like perfectly embodied being a Tory, there it is. Big homie said they were fleeing violence, mostly from the Middle East. Don't you know the Holocaust was done as a consequence of the Grand Mufti? That is what Benjamin Netanyahu told me. And I believe him. He is Jewish after all, and, it's anti-Semitic if I don't agree with him on that one. Oh, are you telling me that you're also a Jewish historian, Barnaby? Okay, well, did you know? I'll have you know, I'm anti-Semitic, but a very specific type of anti-Semite, only anti-Semitic to Jews who are anti-Zionist. Yes, Barnaby. I will now engage in Holocaust revisionism.
They're mainly Sephardi Jews.
Some of my family members who live in Israel came from Europe.
Yes, but the majority didn't. The majority came from the Middle East.
Do you know why my family went to Israel, Jacob? It's because white Christian Europeans who believed in tradition and hierarchy spent 2,000 years excluding and then massacring us. So I will take no lectures from white Christian Europeans who believe in order and hierarchy about anti-Semitism. It's just because people like you spent thousands of years murdering us, I don't think Palestinians
people like me did not do that, actually. You can't...
Wait, first of all, he literally is like, I feel like he probably is directly responsible for some pogroms. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't be surprised. Isn't he like, he's upper class. You can tell, you can track these guys like lineage back to cousin fucking days, no? Yeah.
You can't blame me.
White Christian
you can't blame me for things that had nothing to do with me.
Do you know why I do? Do you know why I do? Because the same logic that says that some life is worthwhile and other lives aren't. That logic that was central.
His grandfather was the man who literally turned Jews away during World War II. Source, trust me, it feels right. Oh, okay. Fuck you.
All life is valuable. All life is valuable. But
now,
surely
that same logic is meted out to Palestinians.
Surely the state of Israel has the right to defend itself.
Palestinians who are ethnically cleansed to pay for Europe's
But they're not ethnically cleansed. This just isn't true. They're not ethnically cleansed.
Why is Gaza one of the most densely populated places in the world?
The Israeli state is trying to defend itself.
The Israeli state is trying to defend itself by forcing the Palestinian dogs into, the Palestinian humans. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Israel has a right to defend itself by doing an apartheid. I love apartheid. It is my favorite thing. Sorry, it is my culture. I am British after all. I love partitions. It is in my nature to tell me that I cannot do partitions in areas that I have no business being in, and ethnic displacement. You are going against my culture. It's unimaginable, sir. The only thing I want more than apartheid and partition is a queue. Have a jolly good day, sir. Anyway.
President Biden has said that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza. Who should govern Gaza when this is over?
Those who don't want to continue the way of Hamas. It certainly is not. I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility because we.
An indefinite period. Fucking an indefinite period. Animal.
We've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
Yeah, see, if we don't control Gaza, if we don't occupy Gaza permanently, you know, see what happens. Yeah. The Tories ruined the UK, and then when popularity backfired, they passed the government quickly to the Labour Party, so the Labour Party will be accused for diminishing the state of the UK. Yeah, I mean, these guys are fucking rabid, dude. The
result is that even if we assume Israel is acting within the laws of armed conflict,
they're not.
A lot of Gazan civilians die.
That's great. Come on, LonerBox. They're not. They're not acting within the fucking... Dude, there is not a single... First of all, the UN doesn't agree with this, and there's not a single human rights group that would agree with that. Nobody agrees that Israel, with the exception of America, Israel's greatest defender. No one believes that Israel is operating within the boundaries of international human rights. No, they're not. They have time and time again lied and said, oh yeah, we're just dealing with Hamas. We're dealing with Hamas. But no, they weren't. They were never dealing with Hamas. They just wanted to fucking keep punishing ruthlessly everyone inside of Gaza with ultimately an arrival at the final solution, which they're currently engaging in. These sorts of things also help with domestic politics for right-wing forces, okay? As a Turkish citizen, I know this very well from Erdogan's actions against the Kurds. Oh shit, popularity is slipping. Boom, let's fucking squeeze the Kurds a little bit. Oh fuck, they retaliated with a terror, they retaliated with like a bombing of a civilian area. Oh shit, now we squeeze the Kurds further. Nobody cares about my corruption now. Okay? It's just like, it's classic. So there's two different reasons as to why Hamas's existence is a gift for Benjamin Netanyahu. And for the record, Benjamin Netanyahu has also personally said this in his own words. Okay? He said this in his own words, both in the 2019 meeting that we talked about. If you want to thwart any kind of nation state, if you want to thwart the development of a Palestinian nation state, you have to make sure that Hamas are the only actors. Okay?
There are a few reasons for this. One, Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, making it almost impossible for civilians to separate themselves from military targets. Two is Israeli recklessness. In the 2008 war, they were challenged for their use of white phosphorus in a densely populated area.
I wouldn't call that challenged for their use of white phosphorus. I would say that is a real war crime. That's not reckless. Like, that's deliberate. That is not reckless. That's just war crimes. They did a war crime, and they always do war crimes for sure.
Destruction of a wastewater treatment.
By the way, they didn't learn from their mistake because they did it again this time around too.
Plant, which had no discernible military use. Their methods of warning people to evacuate targeted areas has often been criticized. For example, roof knocking, where they drop a small explosive on top of a target as a way of warning the civilians inside to evacuate. It turns out that technique is kind of ineffective. It seems to be the case that roof knocks are actually quite hard to distinguish, especially when there are explosions going off all around you. Who'd have thunk that? And more relevant to the present day, they've also been criticized for their failure to allow the free passage of medical items, food, and clothing. And 3, there is Hamas's strategy of embedding themselves in civilian infrastructure. And I know the phrase human shield does sound a bit comical, but it's not a meme. Not only does Hamas place their military infrastructure in residential buildings, schools, and mosques, they've also gone so far as to commandeer people's individual houses to use as temporary military bases. Some of these Israel-Hamas conflicts would only last a few days.
Okay. For every one singular instance of this happening, there are 1,000 instances where Israel indiscriminately is leveling entire city blocks. There is absolutely zero reason to hand it to Israel by saying, oh, it's human shields. How to use a home as a military base? No, Gaza is densely populated, of course, and so is Tel Aviv, by the way. Did you notice that? Tel Aviv is also very densely populated. Israel is also areas where Israeli citizens live are also very densely populated. And guess what? Considering that there's mandatory service in Israel, a lot of those enemy combatant aged males and also women too are technically could be at any given moment active duty service members. This does not justify Hamas deliberately fucking attacking civilian populations. If it doesn't justify Hamas deliberately attacking civilian populations like they did on October 7th, it certainly does not justify Israel doing so, especially when, one, they have the population registry. They literally call people. They know who lives where. They have a massive surveillance apparatus that they're predator drones on top of fucking Gaza every goddamn day. Like, the IDF headquarters are in a civilian area as well. This does not justify nuking Israel, okay? They know what they're bombing. And yes, Hamas does fucking use residential buildings from time to time to fucking throw rockets, or not even residential buildings, but specifically in between residential buildings where they actually fucking throw rockets. But, like, of course they're going to do that. What the fuck? Where are they supposed to lob rockets from? Like, what do you mean? Like, the idea that Hamas uses human shields while Israel does not have human shields is fucking crazy, okay? It's crazy. It's completely ridiculous. They're making do with the limited resources that they have, okay? They have nothing. So they're making do with the limited resources they have in times where they feel as though Israel is increasing the pressure in the West Bank, and they consistently keep doing this. The goal is not to, like, kill every Jewish person. The goal is not to do genocide on Israel. They know they do not have the power to do that anyway, okay? The goal is to say, hey, you can't keep occupying us without paying a fucking price. That's the goal. You can consider that terrorism. I do, especially when it's targeting civilians. But ultimately, that doesn't change the reality of what that goal is, okay? Why would they not use human shields, though? It makes sense as a propaganda tool. No, it's not a propaganda tool. It's not a propaganda tool. See, this is what you're saying. Doesn't Hamas have headquarters under hospitals? There has never been a single fucking indication that Hamas actually has headquarters under hospitals, okay? The only proof is Israel claiming so. And then showing like a fuel depot next to a hospital to be like, well, see, that's actually a Hamas base or whatever the fuck. There's never been proof. I do have proof that it's not. Do I know for sure? Absolutely not. They definitely do have a tunnel network that's 400 kilometers long. Okay? It's 10 meters in the ground and it's 2 meters high. That part is true. And it's 400 kilometers long. There's a tunnel network underneath Gaza. Okay? In certain parts of Gaza. Now, I also know that you can't really reach that tunnel network by using the conventional missiles that you're using. Okay, so that also kind of destroys that. That also kind of destroys that argument too. But the notion that like Hamas is not playing fair is fucking ridiculous. Of course they're not fucking playing fair. What do you mean? They're fighting against a fucking apartheid. Like, what are we talking about? Their tactics are brutal. Their tactics are ruthless. Their tactics are violent. Okay? But, like, we can't even fucking meet Israel on the same metrics as Hamas. What are we doing? What are we doing here? Like, we can't set the same fucking moral standard for one of the largest militaries on the fucking planet, really? Like, one of the largest militaries on the planet with a nuke cannot meet the same moral playing field as a fucking violent militia in an occupied open air prison? Like, really? I mean, think about that. Of course it's not fair. What is the expectation here? That like Hamas is supposed to be fucking launching rockets from out in the open? Are you implying Hamas is moral? No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all, dumb fuck. I'm saying if you think Hamas is immoral, then you should be like grossed out by the mere sight of Israel's actions, by the mere mention of like a fraction of what Israel does on a daily fucking basis. It's so stupid to me. It blows my fucking mind. Check this out. Straw Widow. What?
אז בעצם היה פעולה...
Wait, can't you be generally offended by both sides' actions without being obviously biased? No, you can't. Okay? You can't. That's ridiculous. Okay? Being offended by both sides is ridiculous. Okay? Simply keeping it at like, well, both sides are pretty bad is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Why? I want an end to violence. I think Hamas's actions on, not even just Hamas, but the Palestinian coalition, Palestinian forces in general, and the wanton, indiscriminate violence against civilians is unjustifiable. It is. Okay? But would I ever consider that to be equally ruthless and equally as brutal as like an apartheid regime? Fuck no. And I'll tell you exactly why I don't fucking feel that way. Because I don't feel that way about the IRA. I do not feel that way about the ANC. In every single circumstance, I don't feel that way about the Algerian forces. Because in every single circumstance, the offending party is always going to be the one that sets the standard, the one that is the colonial power. It is ridiculous to act like Israel is a small bean here, okay? It's the same as the Viet Cong and their actions. They were fucking intense. They were so ruthless. They were so brutal. But that brutality came because of how brutal the occupying force was. The person that strikes the first time is important here. Like, it's not, you can't just like cast that away and be like, oh, excuse me, Israel has a right to defend itself. It does. But if Israel genuinely cared more about Israeli security, then they wouldn't act the way that they do. And when all is said and done, Western libs will be like, you had my worthless support until you went slightly too far and now I'm offended. When all is said and done, will you look back if one day there is really, truly a singular secular state where Palestinians and Israelis can coexist with equal rights and representation? Will you look back and say, well, you know, the real violence was the militant factions that consistently harmed Israeli citizens? Okay? I think you can be equally disgusted by the attacks of Hamas on Israel. However, you can't put atrocities on a balanced scale. Yeah, you just can't. You can't do that. Because when all is said and done, if you think that like Palestinians would have no matter what behaved this way, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Not only are you wrong, but it's not even historically accurate. The notion that like Palestinians were always slated to be violent against Jewish people is ridiculous. Oh, here's the other side of this story, by the way. I forgot to bring this up. Official statement from Hamas calling the UN Secretary General to form an international committee to visit hospitals to verify Israel's claims that Hamas uses them as sites for resistance. There it is. I'm by no means generalizing Palestinians. I'm generalizing humankind. Everyone who can cause more destruction will. No, that's not true. That's not true. I do not believe that Palestinians are inherently violent, nor do I believe Israelis are inherently violent. That kind of violence is learned and carefully maintained. Okay? And you're wrong. You want to know why you're wrong? Look at fucking Ireland. You want to know why you're wrong? Look at South Africa. You know why you're wrong? Look at the entirety of Europe. These motherfuckers have been killing one another, butchering one another, while still fucking each other's cousins for a much longer time than they have actually had peace and stability. And you would never even imagine that. You would never look at Europe and go, wow, I can't believe. Fucking World War II, look at Germany. Come on, dude. Ridiculous. The idea that like people are inherently violent is just a silly way to get out of this. Okay? I've got to finish this video. Holy shit, I've spent so much time on it.
Others over a month. At least 2 of them included ground invasions, the last one of which was in 2014, where they actually intended to destroy the tunnel system. So I guess that was a failure. And usually these conflicts would end with a brief ceasefire. Until the next one. And politically, this cycle had, up until just this month, produced a very strange status quo between Israel and Palestine. With the Palestinian leadership fractured between Hamas and Fatah, the peace process over this period has been completely dead. Mahmoud Abbas basically functions as a useless, corrupt authoritarian who has no credibility amongst the Palestinian people, and Hamas are, terrorists. And one of the first things we learn about foreign policy, of course, is you don't negotiate with terror.
Yeah, I don't like this because it's not true. Like, the idea that we don't negotiate with terrorists is just so untrue. Especially like talking about this at the heels of like Afghanistan is so funny. Afghanistan pre-American invasion, Taliban rule. Afghanistan post-American invasion, so many people dead, still Taliban rule. So like terrorism in this regard is both parties engaging in acts of terror, both parties engaging in war crimes. So ultimately, we don't negotiate with terrorists is literally a George W. Bush quote. Like, no serious person should ever fucking use that. I hope he's joking.
You must stop the terror.
For the sake of the Palestinians who suffer, for the sake of the Israelis who are under attack, we must stop the terror.
And for the Israeli right wing, this relation is kind of a good thing. The lack of Palestinian unity means there's no pressure to ever revive the peace process. The terror attacks from Hamas serve to push more and more Israelis further to the right. Eventually, the Israeli...
I can't tell if he's like using that as a joke to say like that's bad and stupid, or if he believes it. I'm a little confused by that one.
Voters reach a point where even the most corrupt shitbag on earth can hold on to power, so long as they're willing to take a strong stance on national security.
Like, if you're going to say this fucking dipshit is a terrorist, then like, this fucking dipshit is this guy is the arch terrorist. You know what I mean? It's true. Benjamin Netanyahu is the arch terrorist, the CEO of terror. In the words of Ben Shapiro, he's an arch terrorist, especially because a lot of the violence that happened, most of the violence that happened way before Hamas. In the entire Israeli history, like a metric ton of the violence predates Hamas. Hamas is born out of that violence. Hamas is legitimized out of that violence and a lack of real interest from the Israeli side in giving Palestinians emancipation or recognition or even like being able to fucking have their own, standing military and shit and conduct their own affairs without Israeli intervention consistently.
Where even someone like Netanyahu can say, you might not like me, but I'll keep you safe. In fact, Netanyahu was one of many right-wing voices who opposed the Gaza pullout in 2005. He actually resigned over it and publicly warned that it would result in Gaza becoming a base for terror. Every attack from Hamas is his way of telling the Israeli public that he was right, that Palestinians cannot be negotiated with, that they need to be handled with strength. The result is that the Israeli voters keep pushing towards the right, the state continues to expand settlements into the West Bank with impunity, and any question of what should ultimately be done with the Palestinians is kept quiet. This, in turn, helps Hamas. With no foreseeable progress coming from Fatah, and with increasing settler violence in the West Bank, Palestinians feel more and more that they have no other option than violence. If they're not turning to Hamas, it's to paramilitary groups like Lion's Den and the Jenin Brigades. In Gaza, the collective trauma of Israeli airstrikes and the hopelessness of life under blockade produces a similar outcome. Hamas may not be as popular as some people think, but the people in Gaza don't have much of an alternative. And all of this works to further Netanyahu's claim that Palestinians are too violent and too fragmented to make peace with. And he does seem to be kind of aware of this. In the last decade,
not kind of aware of this. It is deliberate. It is by design. Also, the Jenin Brigade is just. I mean, it's like it's a standing military at that point on occupied territory. I mean, if you shut out any kind of militant resistance to Israeli occupation on Palestinian territory, then like you have nothing. Like, you know what I mean? Then you're not giving anybody any outs here in this conversation, right? Like, what are they not supposed to have any fucking military? Like, the only fucking people allowed to have guns is like the Palestinian Authority thugs that like Israel has allowed to have weapons so they can like turn them on Palestinians only. Like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? So, as far as like people are becoming more violent than ever and all this other stuff, this is deliberate. And I think that the exact same argument can be presented in the opposing way when describing the top of the hour ad break and how people become violent as a consequence of that. Here's the 3-minute ad break now. The exact argument he's describing here is precisely the argument I make when talking about Hamas. And the reason why I make this argument is because I believe Israel, being the state power and also being the original offending party, considering that it is an apartheid state, has all of the power to end the occupation and therefore cause Hamas and all of its needs in violent emancipatory resistance to perish. That's it. Like, I don't believe that human beings, no matter how much I want them to be, are going to, I don't think that it's right to demand that Palestinians just like sit there and take it and be perfect victims and get slaughtered.
Hamas is his way of telling the Israeli public that he was right, that Palestinians cannot be negotiated with, that they need to be handled with strength. The result is that the Israeli voters keep pushing towards the right, the state continues to expand settlements into the West Bank with impunity, and any question of what should ultimately
U.S. troubled by Israeli settlement expansion plans
be done with the Palestinians is kept quiet.
Like, this is, I'm sorry, but to act like West Bank settlements are a result, like, or people turn the other cheek to West Bank settlements as a result of Hamas violence from Gaza is so unacceptable. I don't agree with that either. If anything, Hamas violence is a consequence, a direct consequence of West Bank settlements. There is infinitely more arguments to be presented on that side. It's ahistorical. Settlements predate Hamas, and one can absolutely state that settlements are directly, like, not even as ahistorical. Like, I've used this example time and time again, but former security officials themselves, while they were in power, and also after they were no longer in power, have said time and time again that this is a direct reason as to why Palestinians push back, Palestinians fight back, Palestinians fucking throw rockets into Israel. Newer polling showing Israeli racism only for suicide bombing. What? Like, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with this at all. I don't think that this is correct. I don't think that the Israeli officials themselves even fully agree with this. Like, if that was the case, then like, Shin Bet members wouldn't regularly talk about fucking violence that Palestinians are subjected to in the West Bank and it being a legitimate security concern, because there will inevitably be retaliation.
Quiet. This, in turn, helps Hamas.
And the idea that like this helps Hamas is also ridiculous. People who ask why Palestinians turn to Hamas should Google Rachel Corrie. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. This in turn helps Hamas. Hey, stop. This in turn helps Hamas, makes it seem like they're like a fucking group that's being voted in or some shit over and over again, in the same way that like Likud is, or Netanyahu can keep creating a right-wing cabinet. You know what I mean? Like, Let her do whatever she wants? No, she's not allowed.
With no foreseeable progress coming from Fatah, and with increasing settler violence in the West Bank, Palestinians feel
like no progress coming from Fatah is also incorrect. Fatah is a feckless, powerless institution, and that is the Israeli design for Fatah. And for the record, I think the most significant part of this video that legitimately shows the interest of Benjamin Netanyahu, at least, is the classic. I use this all the fucking time. I'm sorry, but his 2019 talk, Likud, where this is from the 8th of October, from the Times of Israel. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. Hamas was also included in discussions about increasing the number of work permits. Israeli officials said these permits, which will allow Gazan laborers to earn higher salaries than they would in their enclave, were a powerful tool to preserve calm. This demonstrates that the Israeli officials understand that, like, economic prosperity is the way to try and deal with the political problem without while also simultaneously refusing that the real problem is the apartheid. No. But here. According to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting. Most of the time, Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Far-right MK Bezalel Smotrich, now the finance minister, who was a fucking homophobic fascist by his own words, not mine, his own fucking words, now the finance minister in the hardline government and leader of the religious Zionism party, said so himself in 2015. According to various reports, Netanyahu, what are you doing? Oh, she's too tall now. She could put her fucking whole ass head on the desk. Stop. According to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction party meeting in early 2019 when he was quoted as saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas and Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. This article only paraphrases it. I don't know why he's not actually legitimate. The article only paraphrases it. The original quote is far more damning. He openly states, if you want to thwart the development of a Palestinian nation state, you must make Hamas the only party to negotiate with. Bezalel, is that how you say it? Bezalel. I don't fucking care how you say his name, I'm gonna be honest. Fuck that guy. Anyway, so that guy is a fucking psycho. Israeli lawmaker. My wife wouldn't want to give birth next to an Arab woman. Smotrich justifies segregation in maternity wards. Says he doesn't want his wife lying next to a woman whose baby will murder his child in another 20 years. Really cool guys, by the way. Odd that it's just like this doesn't get mentioned when we're talking about like how the 1988 charter of Hamas is like, we want to do all the Jewish killings, the most amount of Jewish killings possible. And then never covering like people that are voted into positions of power and the many times where they're like, the Arab is a wily dog and must be put down as wily dogs are put down time and time again. Bro branded the baby as a terrorist right after they were born. I mean, if only the Israeli Air Force policy also kind of corresponded to that kind of attitude, assuming that Arab babies are also Palestinian terrorists in the womb. Anyway, this is why I always talk about how fucking insanely racist Israeli politics is and how impossible it is to comprehend, okay? But overall, why did I mention this part? Because this is a deliberate attempt. Everybody knows Hamas are terrorists. Ooh, they're Islamist fundamentalists, right? So if you say all Palestinians have is Hamas by pushing the Palestinians into recognizing that the only option they have left is Hamas, at least fucking taking matters into their own hands and going out on their own terms, okay? Do you understand? Then everyone will go, oh, dude, Palestinians are fucking terrorists. There's no way we can deal with this. We have to let Israel keep ethnically cleansing, okay? We have to keep ethnically cleansing Gaza. Israel has to do this because everyone is Hamas. Everyone is Hamas. The most effective means of, like, completely shutting out and undermining a Palestinian nation state or Palestinian emancipation. This is why I fucking despise these are valid security concerns argument. There is no valid security concern in an apartheid state because one, it's immoral, okay? Fuck your security. And two, you're literally creating less security. There is no way to permanently maintain an apartheid state without it inevitably coming back to bite you in the fucking ass. October 7th is the proof. Think about how restrictive the Israeli occupation has been in Gaza. And October 7th still happened. Clearly, it's a failure. When will people understand that?
Feel more and more that they have no other option than violence. If they're not turning to Hamas, it's to paramilitary groups like Lion's Den and the Jenin brigades. In Gaza, the collective trauma of Israeli airstrikes and the hopelessness of life under blockade.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think LonerBox would ever use the terms that I'm using to describe the situation, because like the things that I say are not exactly the things that I say are not exactly seen by a broader liberal audience as even remotely close to the way they see the world. In the eyes of like the average Western American living in a liberal democracy, they're thinking like they're in a world of fantasy. They're thinking like, oh yeah, Israel is the greatest democracy in the Middle East, is the only democracy in the Middle East. What do you mean it's an apartheid state? That sounds kind of anti-Semitic. Like no fucking shot is any liberal content creator gonna fucking turn around and be like, yeah, no, I think that the Jenin Brigade technically has, under international law, a right to exist. That is something that like no American is going to believe. They're going to be like, what? But they wear bands. They wear the headbands. It looks a lot like the Hamas headbands. Maybe even the ISIS headbands actually. They're white. ISIS wears the black and white headbands. They wear the white and black headbands. I have no way of comprehending that this is like, this is actually technically both morally permissible and legally justifiable under international law, because it's supposed to be their territory. Like there's no world in which you can describe this to people. I do think, however, that he could have been more critical of Israel for sure. And I think at the end he does get a little bit more critical of Israel, but I think he could have certainly been more critical while still, maintaining a liberal predisposition.
Blockade produces a similar outcome. Hamas may not be as popular as some people think, but the people in Gaza don't have much of an alternative. And all of this works to further Netanyahu's claim that Palestinians are too violent and too fragmented to make peace with. And he does seem to be kind of aware of this. In the last decade, he had spent years allowing Qatari funds to be transferred into Gaza, and by his own admission, he did this in part to keep the Palestinian public divided and to buy quiet.
No, he didn't do it to keep the Palestinian public divided. He did this specifically because, well, two reasons. One, you do have to fucking help people economically. In 2018, famously, the one country that immediately recognized when Donald Trump created like the Muslim ban and changed rules in the administration that would make it illegal to give money to Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority even, the people that actually responded to that negatively were the Israeli government. Why? Because they understand that like, yeah, if you fucking starve the Palestinians, they're going to come and kill us. Like, of course, economic volatility and economic instability creates more of an opportunity for radicalization, understandably. So they get it. Like, they understand it. So that's something to always consider when you hear about how Netanyahu and others want to deal with Hamas and want to deal with the Palestinian population in general.
From Hamas. Intelligence officials now believe that at least some of this money was being diverted to Hamas's military operations. Referring to this story about Qatari funds in 2019, a Labour member of the Knesset eerily stated that Gaza border residents were paying the price for the lack of policy and the arrogance in facing terror. Of course, this bizarre equilibrium.
Oh, here. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas, and transferring money to Hamas, the prime minister reportedly said at a 2019 meeting of his Likud party. This is part of our strategy to isolate the Palestinians in the Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. Wait, there's more though. Hold on. The exact comments have not been confirmed by sources. He also said, we control how high the flames go. He did say that. He has a Philly accent, except for when he says Hamas. Anyway.
Equilibrium between Hamas and the Israeli right couldn't last forever. Last year, Netanyahu was elected prime minister alongside the most right-wing government in Israeli history. His coalition involved the leader of the religious Zionist party, Bezalel Smotrich, and the leader of the Jewish National Front, Itamar
Psycho. Also psychotic.
Ben-Gvir. Perhaps two of the most comically evil people in all of modern democracy, both of whom basically want to...
Because it's not a democracy. It's not a democracy. That's why it's not a democracy. They're fascist. Israel is a fascist, Jewish supremacist ethno-state. 1,000%. It is a theocratic ethno-state that is moving on the theocratic front, okay? And remember, it's not my assessment, okay? From where I'm standing, I look to Israel and I go, that motherfucker on the right is Arab. He's an Arab. What do you mean? Like, what do you mean he's Jewish, so he's different than the Palestinian Arabs? Like, he's an Arab. He's half Kurdish, half Arab. The fuck out of here. Fuck you mean? But according to Israel, according to their own designation, he's Jewish, therefore not Arab. Arabs are Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims.
To conquer the entire West Bank. And this new government oversaw two crucial policy positions: the rapid expansion of settlements and to weaken the checks and balances system of the Israeli Supreme Court, both of which would reap horrific consequences on October 7th. The result of settlement expansion was, as it always has been, increased violence between the settler community and local Palestinians, combined with the ambition.
I don't even agree with it. Like, this is a 1-to-1. Like, no, the result is like literally fucking pogroms. Yeah, he is. He's half Kurdish, half Arab from Iraq.
And the rhetoric of Israel's new government, this process was put on steroids. 2022 was the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank since 2004. At the start of this year, when a mob of settlers were rioting through the city of Huwara, Smotrich was calling for the town to be wiped out. Although he would
it's a slip of the tongue.
Later say this was a slip of the tongue. Yeah, I hate it when that happens. The result of these clashes was that
It's funny because, like, there's no point in Israeli history. Like, you look at Smotrich, right? And you're like, oh, well, you know, this is a new version. Like, these guys are like openly fascist and it's very different. It's like, no, dog, there's no point in Israeli history where, like, the motherfuckers in power haven't spoken about Palestinians with the exact same terminology. Yeah? You think they were woke in like 1967? What are you, crazy? What are you, fucking nuts? Like, Ben-Gurion is a great example. Like, there's never been a moment where, like, Zionism did not feature an incredible amount of Islamophobia, an incredible amount of anti-Arab sentiment. Has there ever been a time when they condemned this rhetoric? No. I mean, here, the best condemnation you'll get is when Itamar Ben-Gvir had a mural dedicated to Baruch Goldstein in his fucking house. One of the worst fucking terrorists engaging in like a singular act of violence against Palestinians. A fucking Kahanist terrorist. And this fucking scumbag had a mural dedicated to his murder of 29 Palestinians in a mosque. Okay? They made him take it down, and he was like, fuck no, I don't want to take it down. And they literally forced him to take it down, so he very publicly declared that he took it down only because he wanted to win votes. He wrote a Facebook post where he said, I'm taking the fucking mural down, okay, because you guys are making me, but also more importantly because I want to win votes, and I'm doing this for Israel. Yeah, it was a framed poster, like a mural of this fucking honest terrorist piece of shit.
The IDF had become increasingly more focused on the West Bank than on Gaza. And now, after October 7th, it seems likely that this stretched them too thin and left gaps in their security. As for the judicial reforms, well, we know that they sparked some of the biggest and most drawn-out protests in Israeli history. And we also know that hundreds of IDF reservists were refusing to show up for duty in direct protest.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but these motherfuckers weren't doing that because personally they were like, oh yeah, we have an apartheid state. They were doing that because they were like, oh, we want to still be secular, and you guys are kind of gross in the way that you're conducting internal affairs now. And you cannot separate the two. You can't literally look at a situation where you're like, oh, well, the apartheid state is fine, like, or maybe it's bad. I'll talk about how bad it is in the settlements, while simultaneously fucking being like, I'm actually real mad that you're taking away my secular Supreme Court so I can't like have a fucking secular apartheid state. You know, it just doesn't work that way. The two go hand in hand. And in those protests, as Volodymyr Zelensky said, our lone Israeli leftist in the chat, in those protests, they banned the Palestinian flags, dog. Palestinian flags were not allowed to be flown in those protests. Okay? So make no mistake, they did not want any kind of mention of Palestinians at all at those fucking protests. As an Israeli, I yearn for the day that Israelis and Palestinians can live together in peace. I have lost all respect in my public and struggle for work only because of my anti-Zionist beliefs. My Mizrahi friends aren't considered true Israelis only because of the color of their skin. Some of them have even been brutalized or jailed for protesting against the occupation. It is fascist here. I mean, well, there's some other Mizrahi friends that maybe even have a different approach on the opposing side. But listen, it is a fascist state. You're not alone. There are plenty of fucking people. There are plenty of people in Israel who also feel the same way that you do. You know what I mean? Keep pushing. It's important.
Of Netanyahu's government. During the protests, Netanyahu even fired and then unfired his defense minister for warning that the divisions caused by the reforms were undermining Israel's security. We knew all of this was happening at the time, and if we knew it, so did Israel's enemies. Just earlier this year, Israel had already had its worst clash with Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon since the 2006 war. And their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, openly said Israel was on a path of collapse, fragmentation, and disappearance. That was at the end of July 2023.
I mean, he's not wrong. He literally isn't wrong. I know that, like, people look at that and go, oh, that's a threat. Like, he wants to destroy Israel. The reality is, it's true. If you keep fucking behaving in the way that you're behaving, thinking that you can get away with this, like, anything short of full-blown ethnic cleansing is not going to cut it. Like, you're always going to have to deal with internal domestic pressures, like internal pressures, and a constant security concern. I looked it up. Netanyahu has been prime minister in 1996 to 1999, 2009 to 2021, and December 2022, the president. Lol, cool democracy. Well, I'll have you know that the last time around, he was also going to go to jail. Like, there was an active corruption investigation. That's part of the reason why he was able to whip up a coalition government, and that's the reason why he had to rely on the most like far right elements. He is a fucking freak. He's a demon, dude. He is one of the most violent psychopathic demons in modern history, straight up.
In an interview in 2016, Netanyahu said, "I would like to be remembered as the protector of Israel. That's enough for me." The fear of Hamas amongst Israelis allowed him to keep up this facade for decades. Now, the man known as Mr. Security has become the one who presided over the worst security failure in Israeli history. Neither he nor Hamas ever wanted peace. Both of them depended on keeping their people scared, keeping them opposed to peace.
Bro, they're not like a real political entity. Like, if anything, they have a governing civilian faction that has to engage in civil society. But this is not like there's no, you can't both sides this. Like, I don't think that there is any both sidingness. Okay? This does not exist without this. This certainly exists without this. Okay? Some other form of this still exists without this. That's the problem. Because Israeli policy has been consistent. It has always been consistent. And only under that policy where you carefully maintain an apartheid, where you have this. Like, it's pretty simple too. Like, let's say you kill him, okay? Let's say you kill every Hamas leader. Let's say you blow out the tunnel system. Okay? Let's say you do all of that. Okay. Do you think that, like, the rest of the Palestinians are going to be like, thank you so much. We loved when you killed my family. I personally loved when you blew up my fucking school, and then you blew up my hospital, and then you blew up the fucking food supply, and when you blew up the fucking water supply, when you told me I can't have any water whatsoever, when you called me a human animal. I love that. I'm so glad that you've rid me of Hamas now. I will welcome you with open arms. This is fucking insane. This is a fucking insane thing to claim. Like, please just investigate it a little bit further beyond the talking points, and you will recognize that that is not how this goes, okay? Like, there is no equal ground between Hamas and Benjamin Netanyahu. There isn't. It's ridiculous. One, and its existence is caused directly by the actions of the other, whereas even if it wasn't for him, there was literally someone else. And you could say, Hasan, without Hamas, there'd be another militant faction. That much is also true. But you know how you eradicate it? Not by fucking blowing up Gaza. Not by setting up a permanent occupation on Gaza. Okay? But by engaging in it as a political problem, because that's exactly what it is. Be careful, you are saying shit that will bring heat on you? What do you mean? What heat? Also, what do you mean? I've heat on me now, you think? You think I'm getting heat on me now? I've been getting heat. Nonstop. There hasn't been a moment I haven't been receiving heat for the past fucking 3-4 weeks now.
And in an odd way, they both provided that service for one another. Now, that status quo is over, and the ones who will have to pay the biggest price for it will be the least deserving. The Israelis, who have just experienced the worst attack on Jewish life since the Holocaust, the Palestinians being murdered by settlers in the West Bank, and the people in Gaza who are now trapped in a war zone. Just 4 months ago, a poll found that half of the people in Gaza wanted Hamas to stop calling for Israel's destruction and instead accept a two-state solution based on the 67 borders.
Wait, what? That's literally... In July 2023, Hamas' decision to break the ceasefire was not a popular move. While the majority of Gazans did think it likely that there would be a large military conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, this year, similar percentage supported Hamas maintaining a ceasefire with Israel. That part makes sense. But why would half of them agree with the following proposal? Hamas should stop calling for Israel's destruction and instead accept a permanent two-state solution. That is their, isn't that literally their charter? Well, I guess it's not. Their new charter doesn't say a two-state solution, but a secular state, right? Moreover, across the region, Hamas has lost popularity over time with many Arab publics. This decline in popularity may have been one of the motivating factors behind the group's decision to conduct. I didn't expect this high level of Zionist apology from LonerBox. He's friends with the South African Zionists. I wouldn't. I mean, I think like this at least shows the events. It at least like tells the events, but I think that there are a lot of key details that are missing from it. I don't know. Anyone who downplays Nakba like the video did and no mention of the apartheid is all pro-Zionist? Yeah, I don't know why he didn't mention the word apartheid. I think it's decently fair. It tries a little too hard to be seen as unbiased. I think in a situation like this, it does try to be seen as unbiased. I agree with you. But if you try to be unbiased when it's an apartheid, it's going to come across like you're doing apologia for the actually violent entity. Not to say that Hamas is not violent. Of course it is. But that violence is born out of the violence of the apartheid. He's trying to seem unbiased. He has a video about Israel being an apartheid. Yeah, no, I know he's not. I don't think he's a Zionist. At least from what he has told me, he's not. And I think that... I think that this video, however, relies on a lot of sources that show the situation as though it's like kind of out of Israel's hands. Like it leans a little too much, in my opinion, on Israel's security concerns have necessitated this situation.